Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. I'm glad that you guys can join me. As I often say, you can be anywhere, so I'm glad that you guys just so happen to find yourself right here with me under this particular voice. There is a lot of news taking place, and it was funny. I just got a text message from Esteban. He's going to be joining me at 9 o'clock. So even though you don't see his name on in the bio. He will be here at 9 o'clock. It has to do with this shadowy organization that was funding. It wasn't funding. You saw it on some of the boxes of quote unquote humanitarian aid that was going into Gaza at some of these areas, these concentration camps where the mercenaries were. And come to find out that that's coming out of Mossad and the Israeli government, where this is some kind of boondoggle cash grab, where they were edging out, let's say, humanitarian organizations that were doing food and resources because it was the right thing to do to not starve the population, as opposed to having control over those food or that food and those resources. So Esteban is going to come on and talk about that story coming out of the gray zone. In fact, do I have the article up? I do have the article up. Yeah, Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, GHF. I thought it was GHF. I didn't want to say it because I didn't want to say the name aloud. But either way, Esteban will be on to have that conversation. Esteban is coming out of the Cradle, a fantastic organization. Before I get to the monologue, there was something else I want to talk about. And I gain no, that's wrong. I do gain pleasure out of being right, so I'm not even going to lie. When all of the media was reporting that a deal was reached between the United States and Hamas, your humble host on this channel said, that deal makes no sense. I said, I don't buy it. I don't believe it's going to take place. I was even saying it on Twitter, this deal makes no sense. The only thing you need to do is listen to Netanyahu's speeches, listen to what Netanyahu has been saying, and it has no correlation at all to the deal. The notion that you're saying, hey, we came up with a deal where we're going to pull Israeli troops out of Gaza, when the entire point of you setting up the concentration camps was so the Gazan residents can't come back, and so that you can either kill them or evacuate them out of the country. Okay, these two things don't make sense. There's a clash in these things. And if there's a clash in these things, I'm going to point to Hamas as being taking the L, considering they've taken the L the entire way through on any deal that has taken place. Be very clear. Hamas has been, for the last several months, desperate to get a deal, desperate, and willing to accept almost anything, providing that there's some similar, some idea of fairness within the context of the deal. None of the deals have been fair. And yet they still, for the most part, been willing to accept the deals. It's Israel that hasn't been willing to accept the deals because it breaks the entire model of what they're trying to accomplish of destroying the population or evicting the population and taking over all of Gaza. So if you look at it through that lens of we are destroying every hospital, every school, every UN building, every, rando building, every doghouse that we can effectively find, every apartment building, we're destroying everything. We're destroying everything because we don't want these people to have anything to come back to and no reason to stay. If you look at it through that lens, the rest of it makes sense. I don't know what the lens they're looking at it through. This was obvious going back 6-7 months ago. It was obvious. It was the most obvious thing in the world. And yet the media, for the most part, is acting like, oh my God, we're bewildered by this. We don't understand. Even the Trump administration comes out and says, well, it seems that Netanyahu doesn't have any clear objectives. No, he has very clear objectives. Only thing you need to do is listen to him. It's kind of like the Putin thing, right? Only thing you need to do is listen to him. He tells you exactly what his intentions are and what he wants. Netanyahu has been very clear. You may need to listen to him in Hebrew and get the translation, because all things being equal, when he says something in English, oftentimes it's different. But he tells you very clear, they are not coming back. We are going to control Gaza. We are going to do this until our objectives are accomplished. And the added objective being this control of Gaza. You only need to listen to Trump, who comes out with this humanitarian argument of, oh my God, it is so horrible to live here. Oh, and these people are so hungry, and there are such horrible conditions. It is so bad. As if the US is some third party spirit in the wilderness somewhere, just watching things from space, as opposed to contributing 80% to the murder and horribleness and the genocide that is being committed. Don't give me this shit about, oh my God, it's so horrible. You are doing it. You are doing it. So this scheme that is being run, this propaganda management that is taking place between the United States and Israel, as the media acts completely bewildered by this process, I have no idea what they're looking at. So when deal comes out, don't take my word for it, right here. You get, no, this is not my monologue, but I'm just trying to make this point. You get right here, this. I think it was like a couple of days ago, at least from my time zone. Hamas has issued a press statement confirming it's reached an agreement on the general ceasefire framework with the United States envoy Steve Witkoff, permanent ceasefire, full withdrawal from Israel forces from Gaza, immediate aid flow, appointment of professional committee to manage Gaza post-deal. I said, that makes no sense. I said, that makes no sense. Fast forward, day later, you get this. Clarification. Hamas did agree to the ceasefire presented by Witkoff, but Israel changed it, effectively adding a poison pill. I wonder why would they do that? And I wonder who the US will blame now that Israel has changed it and has altered it in a way that is unacceptable. Steve Witkoff and Hamas agreed to a ceasefire with Hamas. The terms were agreed. This was reported on Reuters and several publications and Palestinian sources. Israel did announce they had agreed with the ceasefire by Witkoff. At this point, the ceasefire was fully agreed by both sides. From their perspective, then Hamas received the final draft of the ceasefire agreement, and they were not the same as they had agreed upon as Israel had changed it. Hamas are now accessing these new changes based on Israel's manipulation to the document. I'm so shocked. I'm so floored. I'm so shocked. Here's the problem when the quote-unquote mediator is giving 80% to a genocide, and the genocide is being committed to the other side of the negotiation, is that whatever the side that is getting 80% does, they're never going to be held responsible for it. You saw that in the beginning where Israel continuously violated the quote-unquote agreement. You saw that when Witkoff got the American hostage out, and you see it now. You saw it last week where Witkoff turned around and says it's Hamas' fault, despite the fact that Israel did the exact same thing. If you look at it through the lens that Israel is a settler colonial state that believes that they have an administration that is radically obsequious and that would allow it to effectively take all of Gaza, and that they've been committing a genocide for the last 2 years that nobody has stopped, nobody has intruded upon, nobody has got involved in, and the US has fundamentally let them do it, and giving them the money and the bombs and the political cover to do it. The US a week ago was arguing, I believe it was to the ICJ, that Israel has a right to starve 2.2 million people. And I'm supposed to believe that the US is some kind of mediator in this process? You're starving people because you want to control their population. You want those people to die. You want those people to go away. You blow up hospitals because you don't want them to go to the hospital. You want them to die of cancer or for kidney disease or for bombings or for whatever other illness and infirmity that they effectively have that they can't get treated. If you have hospitals open, then those people go get treated. That goes against your expressed wants and interests in getting rid of those people. Their lens is weird. I don't understand what media is looking at as they analyze this, but they are getting it grotesquely wrong, and they seem to be bewildered by it the entire way through. Fix your lens. Fix your lens. So right now, we're here. We were surprised last night by the Israeli response, which was practically the opposite of the movement that we had agreed to and communicated with the American envoy through mediators. Effectively, you have changed this to such a degree that it no longer resembles what we initially wanted. And again, if you're Hamas, you probably are not surprised by it. But you are in such a situation that you need a deal. Now, the question for Hamas is, are you going to accept that Israel will take the hostages, say thank you very much, rearm, reload, and then start the killing spree all over again? You would have to accept that what Donald Trump has said he wanted was to evacuate, to ethnically cleanse that area, with Netanyahu in full agreement for the ethnic cleansing. That's what you would have to accept as Hamas for the deal that has now been given to them. Will they accept that? I don't know. I could give you a very clear answer that Israel was going to change it, or at the very least not going to abide by it, because it's kind of obvious. Whether Hamas would accept it, given the desperate situation that they're in, is a different question, and I don't have an answer to. What I want to get to, however, is the monologue, is, we're not going to have time for this. This ludicrous piece by the New York Times, talking about fixing your lens. Trump vision, one world, three powers. And just to give a brief summary, what the article is effectively referring to is that what Donald Trump wants is a multipolar world with various power centers on that globe. The power centers being one, the US, two, China, three, Russia. Notice Europe is not mentioned in that because the US has no respect for Europe. That is the argument that the article is effectively making, that the US has given up on hegemony. What's wild about the article is the article seems to think that's negative and compared to a unipolar world, with the United States being in control of the unipolar world, something that it has now, and talks about the model that they are referring to as imperial, that, you know, we have spheres of influence. Newsflash, rules-based order is a non-recognition of sovereignty as spheres of influence. We basically take this kind of royal imperative over the globe. And if you're talking about breaking the world up into three spheres of influence, that's better than a unipolar world, at the very least. The article is weird. But I want to make the point that that is not what Trump is doing. I don't even know how the article is making this argument that that's what Trump is doing, considering what he's doing is pretty straightforward. Pete Hegseth, when he comes out and he goes to Europe when Trump first gets in office and says this, listen to what he says. It's important.
Leaders of our European allies should take primary responsibility for defense of the continent, which means security ownership by all allies, guided by a clear understanding of strategic realities, and it's an imperative given the strategic realities that we face. And that begins with increasing defense spending. 2% is a start, as President Trump has said, but it's not enough. Nor is 3%.
Okay. I'm going to come back to this because my guest is here and I don't want my guest to wait. I will definitely come back to this. That article by the New York Times is warped. I think they missed the point. The U.S. is not giving up on hegemony. Donald Trump is not giving up on hegemony. If anything, it is a diversification of resources because they want to go after other actors in China, and the U.S. has already found itself as an empire that's stretched too thin. That's what it is. Hegemony by other means. It is not this notion of giving up polarity. If that was the case, the Ukraine war wouldn't have taken place. If that was the case, he wouldn't be putting troops in Taiwan. But I want to go to my guests. I am joined, let me kill that. There we are. I'm joined by the man himself. Come on, StreamYard. Come on, come on. Laith. There we are. I don't know what the hell StreamYard was doing. I'm welcomed by the man himself, Laith Marouf. Laith Marouf is an award-winning multimedia producer and media policy law consultant focused on issues of liberation, decolonialization from indigenous nations to Arab peoples, and building broadcasting capabilities for misrepresented, underrepresented communities around the world. You can find him at FreePalestineTV. You can find that on online, but you can also find it on Twitter. I accept that. I totally accept it. But it's rare, is my point. And most people aren't putting their bodies on the line in order to get those stories out and allow people to see the reality that's taking place on the ground. That's why I take this kind of point of view of it is fully earned. I'm always impressed by, I mean, I don't know if you consider yourself a war correspondent, but Lord knows you put yourself in a line of fire when you go out there. Israel has shown all capacities of being willing to murder anybody, especially hunting down journalists, especially hunting down people, exposing what they've been doing. I mean, for God's sake, they murdered a guy in a hospital room that they had already injured, right? So, no, man, you do God's work.
We were just recording over yesterday a report that should come out, inshallah, tomorrow with a journalist here on the front lines. And it's a report about the attacks on journalists here in Lebanon. There's at least 11 media workers that have been martyred in Lebanon. We know of course, the big story is the 200 plus journalists in Gaza that have been killed, but this has been true here. And we were going into the frontline positions right under Israeli bases, overlooking us across the whole border yesterday, recording this documentary. And, we were followed as we were filming this documentary with other journalists about the attacks of journalists multiple times by drones. And we were in their sniper sights. We were just under bases, literally. And so I know what you're talking about here in terms of the danger. We've had multiple very close situations, during the war. Around 6 months ago, people can see this report. We were filming in around the Nabatiya region, and an Israeli drone fired 2 missiles right beside us. We were very lucky. One of those missiles was white phosphorus, but the wind blew the other side, so the hand of God intervened, and they fired a fragmenting missile, sharpnail missile right after, because they saw that the white phosphorus didn't hit us. And again, the hand of God intervened, and there was a half wall from cinder block that was separating us on the road from the side of the land, and that wall took all the sharpnel. So I understand, and I know that I was the enemy, and I'm still the enemy number one of the Zionists in Canada. I know that for 30 somewhat years, they would have loved to put me in jail. They tried many times in Canada to do so, destroy my careers, threaten my life in different ways, dox my home, dox my children. Those have happened. And it's not, I still don't see any of this as unique. I want people to understand that if you truly want to stand for justice, not only about Palestine, you have to be willing to risk your life. Yeah. And we look at what happened to Black liberation movement and media, and in Africa, in Latin America, in the Arabic world, in Asia. This is not a unique story. And anyone that is questioning liberation has to know that the path of liberation or the path of truth-telling in journalism is a choice of life or death. And you're either going to die on this path, or you're going to survive and be the victor. There's no other choices. Otherwise, sit down and just enjoy the ride. You're not going to be part of the writing of the history.
Yeah. Doing good doesn't mean good follows, right? I mean, oftentimes people who do good are vilified for it. That's why it's called doing good. It's a cost. speaking of that, and speaking of journalism, I have been, it is astonishing to me that after 2 years of watching Israel go on a genocidal rampage, that the media is still seemingly in the dark about what's happening. And what I mean by this is, as I was telling the audience before you got here, so it came out that the US and Hamas got a deal. US and Hamas got a deal. Now, I immediately say this is nonsense. When this came out, I said this is nonsense. That, like, the notion that you guys are running with this is baloney, considering everything that we know at this point. I said the deal doesn't even make sense. And you got the Trump administration, Witkoff specifically, rushing out to talk about this deal. I thought I had the article up, the thing up. But you get Witkoff streaming out to the cameras to talk about the deal that they apparently got. So according to the reporting, and this is reported through Reuters, hell, even RT is reporting it. It says Hamas has issued a press release confirming it reached an agreement on a general ceasefire framework with the U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff, the same Witkoff that negotiated the quote-unquote deal the first time around that Israel continuously violated, the same Witkoff that blamed that blamed Hamas when Israel pulled out the deal like last week, that same Witkoff. It says a permanent ceasefire, full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, immediate aid flow, appointment of professional committee to manage Gaza post-deal. And apparently Trump was supposed to be very engaged in it. I guess he wasn't supposed to be engaged the previous times. And as I keep pointing out, they're acting as if the U.S. is some mediator. The U.S. has given 80% of the genocide. They've given all of the bombs to the genocide. They were just at the ICJ arguing that Israel has the right to starve 2 million people. So this notion that the U.S. is some kind of honest mediator is nonsense. I call BS on this immediately. All right, day passes, and we get this. Clarification. Hamas did agree to the ceasefire presented, but Witkoff changed it. But Israel changed it. It says Witkoff and Hamas agreed to a ceasefire. Israel then announced it agreed to it also. When Hamas got the final draft document, they found that Israel had effectively rewrote the agreement. They made alterations to it, putting in poison pills to the agreement. Now, the reason I call BS on it is because Israel's stated objective was to eliminate the Palestinian population and not allow them to come back. Donald Trump's stated objective was to ethnically cleanse the area. And so if both of these parties are agreeing that the entire objective is to get rid of the population, then how could they come to an agreement that the Israeli military is leaving? It just didn't make sense. Give me a take on this. I mean, how do they get this so wrong? And I can't believe there's coordination across all of media where they are this in the dark. Or are they really this in the dark on it?
Well, I would kind of encourage people not to follow Dropsite. Jeremy Sakehill and was
Scahill.
part of the Scahill, whatever his name is, was part of the Intercept crew that were taking money from the eBay billionaire magnate, and were a part of the cover-up for the WikiLeaks files that were just disappeared after given to them. So I think we need to not always recycle the same people that screwed us over as movements before, just because they create new sites and suddenly pretend to be fully on side against imperialism and genocide. So that's my first point. Second is that obviously there will be no ceasefire. Let's be very clear. Hamas, outed this plot that just happened. The United States is not interested in a ceasefire, neither is Israel. They're trying to just extend the killing period that is for, the culling, the genocide, the Holocaust, those camps that we just saw the videos of supposedly giving aid looked exactly like Auschwitz or something like this, So I saw an image today of one of these American mercenaries carrying an American flag on top of and in front of a lineup of starving Palestinians. So it's again, it's and you know, the CIA, former CIA member that ran this new company resigned because he thought it was too much of a genocidal tool. Can you
Think of
imagine an
that, right? Got from
CIA?
CIA is like, this is too far.
This is too far, man. This is too far, you know. And he walked out. So it's clear to me what is happening. This is all again part of the theatrics of giving all this media. As we saw, all these media outlets got consumed by this fake story, and it's now been 48 hours of it running there while the genocide continues. And in such cases as these camps, it's actually becoming permanently structured directly on the ground beyond just bombardment from the air. So we have now institutionalization of the genocide being implemented on the ground structurally, as this media cover is being given to them by the mass media in the West that are part and parcel of the implementation of this genocide.
Yeah, and this is one of the cases of an American contractor. Apparently, the guy gets like $30,000 a month. I mean, extraordinarily well paid. And my thing was like, who's paying this guy? Like, they got rid of the aid organizations. They put in goons like this. They have these people in camps. There are apparently multiple camps all throughout the region. Trump and Netanyahu, whatever people want to believe, are perfectly on the same page for this. This is not like, oh my God, Netanyahu's taking advantage of Trump. It's not that. They have said as much that they're on the same page. So what is the ultimate solution here? I mean, are they really going to find somewhere to take this population? I mean, some people make the argument that the Palestinians aren't going anywhere. Like the idea that you're going to evacuate 2 million people. It's not going to happen. By the same token, they have done everything in their power to set up, let's say, the means by which to either kill, starve, or evacuate, expel, ethnically cleanse all of those people at the Gaza Strip. What do you think is happening with this ultimately?
Well, I mean, I've been saying this since the beginning of Al-Aqsa flood to specifically people who support the resistance before I even talking to the masses. A decolonization struggle is a very humanly costly struggle. There is no decolonization struggle that did not require the sacrifice of at least 2 million people. Okay. When we're talking about the decolonization of Vietnam, that was 6 million Vietnamese, Laotians, and Cambodians that had to perish in order to defeat the Zionist, the imperialist, which is the Zionist forces of the United States and France. Similarly, in Algeria, it was 2 million just in the last years of the struggle, 6 million overall, of the colonial era, to kick the French out. So we cannot expect that Palestine, which is the most crucial and valuable land in the world in terms of its position geographically, to liberate Palestine, to do that and not have to pay the price of 2 million Lebanese, Palestinians, Syrians, Yemenis, Iraqis, whatever, at least, if not 6 million. Okay, the United States will not, and with it all the West, leave without a price of that worth. Okay, and so everybody needed to buckle down on October 7th, 2023, and not get hyped into thinking that things are going to end easily. We're talking about the whole combined might of the West, and the West openly told us The empire told us over and over since October 7th that this Zionist colony and its survival is the crucial thing to maintain the imperial hegemony of the West. They told us over and over. That Israel is fighting on behalf of all of them. That if Israel falls, all of their ability to dominate the rest of humanity ceases to exist. That's what our enemy told us. And yes, we have to believe them. That is the truth. So we will see in the next months, of course, more and more of the Palestinians in Gaza dying. And we will see, actually, as we saw over the last week with this Elias Rodriguez attack on Israeli propagandist embassy workers, we will see the actually militarization of struggle and militancy of the struggle to support the end of the genocide in the West. We will see what just happened with Elias Rodriguez happening in Toronto, happening in London, happening in Paris. And this war, as we are seeing it, is going to affect not only with these actions of militancy that will happen. I'm not asking for this to happen.
Right.
I'm telling you this is going to happen. I already told people that it's going to happen 6 months ago, when it was clear after the mass bombardment of Lebanon and the assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, that now the Palestinians are going to mainly face that by themselves, the Zionists, that we will see these militant actions take place in the West. So now it's going to expand as more and more the genocide accelerates, and as there's no more cover for the elite to justify this genocide, as they had for the last year and a half. I mean, the failure now of the propaganda machine of the West of justification of the genocide is going to accelerate militancy of action on the streets of the West, because the elite are refusing to end the genocide. Okay.
Right. Yeah, when you lose Piers Morgan, you lose everybody. I mean, Piers Morgan has been a defender of this genocide for the last 2 years. And even he has been like, okay, this seems excessive. Going after the other person. And, to back up your point, when you see day after day, children being burned alive, children being shot and killed, when you see kids being used as human shields, when you see people being raped in jails, when you see hospitals being destroyed, your conscience gets involved. And whether the action is right or wrong, it becomes somewhat of an obvious human nature thing that people get more aggressive the longer it goes on in their pushback. As you pointed out, you're not calling for it, you're not advocating for it, you're pointing out that this is just how people act when things like this take place. I am curious, though, why do you think Europe 2 minutes ago has all of a sudden saying, hey, this looks bad. We don't like that you're starving people, even though you've been starving them for the last 8-9 months. Why do you think they're Johnny-come-latelys to this now? I mean, if they didn't care about it 6 months ago, 3 months ago, why all of a sudden now?
Well, there's 2 reasons. One is that Europe mainly is still ruled by the liberal wing of the empire that still wants to play this propaganda of human rights and international law that the United States and the conservative arm side of the empire have ejected. Okay. And we see how Trump is standing by with the king of Saudi and Netanyahu. So that's the conservative side of the empire that is done with theatrics and just wants to project force and get their enemies to back down through force, not through propaganda. So that's one thing. The other is that Europe hosts a much larger Arabic and Muslim population, percentage-wise, all these European countries, in comparison to the United States. The United States had an undeclared quota on immigration from Arabic and Muslim countries for over 100 years. In comparison, Canada or the rest of Europe in general has huge Arabic and Muslim population. France itself has 30% people from the Maghreb and Africa, right? So it's a huge population. And if we saw how the continuation of this genocide and the outright non-stop snuff videos that we watch have affected a Christian Latino guy in DC or in the United States to take that action. And over the last 20 months, the Arabic and Muslim population in Europe has been beaten up and down the streets, just like that students were beaten in the United States. But again, it's a much larger population. So just by statistically talking, there's a higher percentage, statistically, possibility that there will be more militancy in the movement against genocide in Europe than it is in the United States. That's just statistics. And I think they're all in this moment of total freakout. What's going to happen if there is, at some point, not only militancy, but race riots? That's another thing. The United States worries when the Black community is at the edge of having race riots. France is scared when the Algerians and the Arabs and their brothers and sisters that are intermarried to them, that are from Western Africa, start wanting to riot. We remember the last riots in Paris, what happened, weeks across France, they couldn't control it. Now imagine if it gets militant, actually not only physical confrontation, but arms involved in the situation. I think Europe is at the edge of that. Again, not calling for it, but this is the natural path of development of the situation. And as long as the European elite, the voices within the European media are even more conservative, let's say, than these voices coming out from the president of France or whatever about ending the starvation, there is a very big likely that this will get out of hand control.
I have to move to, I guess there's one question on Syria that I want to ask. HTS seeming this, at a recent press conference, and I guess not a press conference, I guess it was a Senate hearing, Rubio pointed out that he believed that Syria was going to go into a quote unquote civil war, as he called it. Effectively, that HTS was going to lose control of the continent. Recently, there's footage out where HTS is once again in a fight where a militia of Druze has been fighting the HTS military contingent. Do you see that effectively happening? That this breaks down into some sort of continued escalation of conflict, where even though there may be pauses, that it is continuous escalation and continuous buildup?
Yeah, I mean, the United States and the Zionists want to have in Syria a hybrid of what happened in Libya, or what is happening in Libya, and that of what happened in Iraq and Lebanon. So the country is in anarchy in reality. There's cantons, is on the path of something like Yugoslavia to break the same people. Yugoslavia, by the way, means South Slavic, South Slavia, the same people, and pretend that they have different languages, Croatian and Serbian and Bosnian, they're the same language, just accent, like accent of New York and accent of Texas, you know, and cut them down on religious or sectarian lines of these cantons and have huge population transfers and, you know, create such schisms between the fabric of the Syrian society that it's irreparable, right? That's what the aim of ISIS and Al-Qaeda is, and HTS. HTS is delivering, and Al-Jolani is delivering on what is requested of him. And he'd willingly, you will see, break up Syria, okay? It's not like he's fighting to keep Syria together, even as a thug, okay? He has no decision control of himself. And that's even if he's a thug, if he's not a Mossad, you know, Arabized, you know, like al-Baghdadi and before him Cohen in Damascus. So this is, I think, what the West wants. Hearing Rubio talk about this is not predicting; he's telling you what he wants to do.
Right. Right. No, that's a good point. I have to be honest with you. I thought Jelani was going to be a fall guy. That ultimately there was no way on God's green earth that the U.S., or for that matter, Mossad, Israel, was going to be perfectly okay with an ISIS thug taking over and controlling this massive, important country. And if you allow somebody like Jelani to take over, you make it perfectly okay to overthrow Jelani, with Israel effectively saying, oh, well, Syria's in chaos, so we need to expand further. That basically Jelani taking over was their way to get further expansion by Israel into Syria, to allow them to take more and more territory under the justification that Syria is now in turmoil and we need to defend ourselves by stealing more Syrian land, with Jelani being perfectly the fact that he's a terrorist. They have zero issue or any loyalty associated to him. Trump can shake his hand all he wants, but ultimately Trump will walk out and say, yeah, we're okay with killing that guy and get rid of that guy. What is your take on that? Or no, he's the president's man. He's Israel's guy. As long as he do their bidding, they're perfectly okay with him being there. Which one is it from your point of view?
Well, he's definitely the man of the conservative wing of the empire that I just spoke about, right? If there was a Democrat in the White House, although this Al-Julani is a CIA asset, the United States would have, you know, used a propaganda to claim the things that you said and give Israel more land, which, you know, and continue the supposed sanctions and what have you. Okay, but now the United States is governed by the conservative wing that includes the Saudis and the Israelis, and they don't need to do the propaganda. They don't believe in this propaganda, and therefore they're outright giving Israel more land of Syria, and Al-Julani and HTS and ISIS are not fighting back. They're outright looting all the resources of Syria, and Al-Julani is not fighting back. And they're cutting the country into cantons, and Al-Julani is not fighting back. You see, they don't need to anymore do it in propaganda. This is in the, what the conservative wing of the empire believes, and maybe they are right. They're just doing it by force. Why waste time on propaganda? Al-Julani is an Israeli, most probably, or as we saw from his record in his holding in what is it called, Abu Ghraib in Iraq, in his cell, his record says he's born in Saudi. So is he a Saudi or is he an Israeli? It doesn't matter. It means he's delivering on the conservative wing's positionality.
Oh, I see. Good point. And last topic that I want to get to. I want to get your take on this video. So the New York Times, once again, day late, dollar short. I always think you have to read between the lines on some of these articles that are coming out of the New York Times. Trump in one of his recent press conferences, was asked, let's see, yeah, all right. He was asked this in relation to a New York Times story that came out about a quote unquote deal with Iran. Now, I have to be honest with you, I don't know how this deal is going to take place. Trump has been escalating his demands the entire time. He doesn't seem to know exactly what he wants, short of doing something that ends up in war. And some of the most recent reporting was that he was going to be willing to accept a memorandum of understanding that they were going to at some point work towards a deal, because Iran has already told from the beginning, we're not accepting this kind of Libya model that you guys are trying to put forth. We're not stopping our work in the region. We're not stopping any of the stuff. We're supposed to be talking about nuclear enrichment. That was the only thing we're supposed to be talking about. And if you're going to be talking about anything else, we have nothing else to talk about, which means if you need to do a military strike, God be with you as you do that strike. We will blow your shit out the sky. That is the way and the position that Iran is taking. And God bless them for taking that position on this. The US has threatened to bomb and attack for God knows how long. Now, the New York Times is acting as if Israel would do a strike purely on their own without the US supporting them. And one of the things that's buried in the article is because ultimately they know or believe that the US will back them up when Iran retaliates, which Iran will do. So whether in his mind Trump wants a deal, or whether in his mind he doesn't care about a deal and the entire fix is in for them to have a strike, it's irrelevant to the point. Will the US back up Israel when they get bombarded by Iran? Well, the answer is, of course, yes. And I think everybody and their mama knows the answer is yes. This is what Trump said, though, and I want to get your take on this comment that he made here.
Blow up whatever we want, but nobody getting killed. We can blow up a lab, but no.
Back on Iran, did you warn Prime Minister Netanyahu against taking some sort of actions that could disrupt the talks there in a phone call last week?
Well, I'd like to be honest. Yes, I did. Next question, please.
Mr. President, doesn't matter on sanctions.
I did, yeah.
If Senate Republicans want to push
It's not a
forward-
warning. I said, I don't think it's appropriate.
What exactly did you tell him? Did you
I just
caution
said,
him?
I don't think it's appropriate. We're having very good discussions with him. And I said, I don't think it's appropriate right now. Because if we can settle it with a very strong document, very strong, with inspections and no trust. I don't trust anybody. I don't trust anybody. So no trust. I want it very strong where we can go in with inspectors. We can take whatever we want. We can blow up whatever we want, but nobody getting killed. We can blow up a lab, but nobody's going to be in the lab, as opposed to everybody being in the lab and blowing it up.
He talked like a fool. Like the notion that Iran is going to be like, yeah, you can come in, take whatever you want and blow up whatever you want. Laith, give me your take on that.
I mean, obviously, everybody knows that Trump made huge changes to the White House press corps there and has all these plants, basically, that are asking him questions that have been told to ask. I mean, he wanted to look like he, still has control of Netanyahu, that the Zionists don't control him, that he controls Netanyahu, and that this, the dog is on a leash still. Right, that it's not wild, but that's his speaking to the MAGA crowd that are for months now been watching him being dragged on a leash by Netanyahu and the Zionists. So we should not believe any of that. Another thing that everybody should know is that the vast majority of the United States F-35 fleet right now is stationed in the Zionist colony.
Right.
So any attack that the Zionists are claiming to have conducted against Yemen and or in the future against Iran is actually being conducted by American pilots in American jets. The Israelis don't have the capability to conduct these mass raids on huge territories like Yemen and or Iran. It's just a show. And the Iranians know this. And as long as these jets that are American are not flying out of American airfields in Qatar or Iraq, Saudi or the Emirates, the American assets on the ground in those countries are safe. This is part of the game. The Americans have decided that they cannot fight a war against Iran and or Yemen from their airfields in the Gulf and or their aircraft carriers because they were close to being sunk. And therefore, the only way to conduct warfare now against Yemen and or Iran is through this camouflage charade, pretending that it's Israeli flights, jets flying out of Israeli airports.
Agreed. I agree with everything you said, with one exception. I think that dog is on a leash. I think we're controlling that dog. Like, I don't buy that Israel is a rogue actor in this. Like, I think this is the same thing for Europe. That Europe knows what colonialism looks like. They know how bad it is. And they are trying to distance themselves while allowing Israel to do what Israel does in regards to taking Gaza. And I think Donald Trump, for all of this talk about, oh my God, I can't believe Netanyahu is doing this. Okay, dude, until you stop the weapons, don't talk to me. Like, until you know.
There's one thing with this. Okay,
Yeah.
I would have 100% agreed with you 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think we need to understand how integrated Zionism is within the Western empire. Like the South Afrikaner, they like to call themselves also indigenous, like these Zionists call themselves Semites.
Mm-hmm.
They had an important role in the imperial order, positionality on the Cape of Hope and the diamonds and so forth. But the Afrikaner elite didn't play a crucial role in the elite systems in other countries.
Right.
They were not like, let's say, owning news outlets in the United States or Canada or the UK, where they can be the kingmakers. Okay. What we have right now is a symbiosis between the Zionists that are Jewish supremacists and the rest of the elite in the West that have adopted Zionism as their national religion. It's the state religion that is enforced by the state's force. You see, that integration makes it hard to, at this point, say that the Zionists are just tools of the empire. I think they are. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry.
They are part of it. Yeah, they are one and the same. This is the problem right now, and this is why, otherwise, the mass movements in the West against the genocide over the last 2 years would have had a effect. Okay, would have had effect in the media, would have had effect on the politics, would have had effect on the elections. None of that happened because the whole elite structure in the West decided we're one color on this issue, and we will not allow the democratic representation of our own citizens. We are willing to cut the rights of our own citizens and make them sacrifice at the altar of Zionism. Thousands of people lost their jobs, professors. Look at what's happening in the universities. The United States at this point is willing to burn all the higher education clout it had for almost a century, right? It's willing to destroy its most important jewels of education, from Harvard to Yale to others, destroy them, destroy the international student corps that finances most of everything, destroy the research, all of that for Zionism. That wouldn't have happened. It didn't happen for Vietnam. It didn't happen for South Africa. This is where I personally can't anymore argue that the Zionists are the dog on the leash. I think they are the, I was going to say something rude, but I usually don't
dog
like
wagging the tail, basically, or the tail wagging the dog. Yeah. Interesting. So you think that they are a rogue actor, that this is a situation where Israel is, that dog is off the leash on some level. That the U.S. has fundamentally lost control of its own entity, its own colony.
I think the dog and the tail are one. I think
I see.
the elite in the West are genuine when they're saying Israel is God's chosen people. They're actually genuinely pushing
terrifying,
this.
Laith.
The Witkoffs and the ambassador of the United States in Tel Aviv, whatever his name is right now, I can't remember. They actually believe that they are manifesting Armageddon. Okay. The Western elite believe that they cannot survive without Israel, and therefore they will do anything.
What do you think is in Trump's mind? And I know that's a dangerous place with all sorts of, skeletons and cobwebs. But do you think that ultimately, if he could get a deal, he would want a deal? The reason why I'm asking this, according to the New York Times, and Jeremy, give me 1 second. According to the New York Times, Trump wants a deal, and that Israel believes that ultimately Trump will take a deal and just lie. Like, basically, it's like, okay, I don't want to get into this larger war with Iran. I didn't even have the stomach to deal with potentially having planes shot up to sky by Yemen. And so, yeah, all things being equal, I don't want Israel to screw up some kind of deal that I may get, even if that deal is just a memorandum, even if it's weaker than the JCPOA was. Trump will, he would do it, right? He'd get a deal and lie. He would just say, hey, this is the greatest deal in the history of deals. Nobody has ever had a deal this great. We can go in and blow stuff up, even though there will be no proponent of the deal, no part of it at all. And Israel's thing is like, okay, we know this guy's a habitual liar. And our concern is that he would take anything, call it a success, and run with it. We don't want that. And so what we need to do is somehow sabotage this deal, sabotage this effort. And by sabotage, we will hit we would hit Iran, and we would force the US to come in to protect us, because we will need protection, because Iran will rain hell down on us. And Dad, one last point, may blackmail the US with nukes. Hey, if you don't help us, we may use nukes. And so you need to come to our assistance. Meaning, what do you think is in his mind? Do you think that all things being equal, he would want a deal, all things being equal? Or, as you say, no, he's part of the machine also. He's the guy who's going to be stuck holding that bag.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's the Real Housewives of Mar-a-Lago. Okay, this is reality TV that is scripted. What you're seeing is really, this is the difference between the propaganda right now of Trump and what was the propaganda of the Democrats before. The propaganda of Trump is appealing to this reality TV audience. The propaganda of the Democrats is appealing to the PBS and 60-minute watchers, right? You see, this is it. But ultimately, it's all scripted. Yeah. Both propagandas are scripted, and people need to understand that and start looking only on actions. Don't listen to anybody what they're saying. Look at the reality. Who took what action, and judge from that. Judging from the last 20 months, the West is willing to give all the weapons, all the money, all the media cover, all the legal cover, all the international diplomatic cover for the Zionists to conduct genocide out in the open.
Yep.
And up until now, no words from France, no words from the Trump administration or Canada or anybody matter. Their actions didn't change. The air bridge of weapons continues. The non-stop surveillance flights by the British and the French and the Canadians and everybody over the area is still continuing. So until something changes, I don't believe none of this reality TV show.
Agreed. I agree with everything that came out of your mouth. Laith, thank you for this, man. I always appreciate these conversations. I think you have your finger on the pulse of the stuff. Mainstream media misses it. I don't know why they continuously miss it, but they do. So thankfully, people like you are paying attention. Laith Marouf is an award-winning multimedia producer and media policy law consultant focused on issues of liberation and decolonialization from indigenous nations to Arab peoples and building broadcasting capabilities for misrepresented and underrepresented communities around the world. You can find Laith on FreePalestineTV, online and on Twitter. Laith, you have a program that is coming out tomorrow, correct?
Yes, you can find it, of course, on our YouTube channel, and all the links to our socials are on freepalestine.video. That's the website, and hopefully, people would watch and share and donate if you can. So this is all, viewer donations that driven content. We don't have any funding from any political parties or NGOs or governments. And we appreciate people have been supporting this work, and we are continuing to produce it. Thank you very much, Jamal, for having me.
No, man, I appreciate you joining me. You be safe, okay? Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
All right. Great conversation by Laith. He is fantastic. He knows his stuff. I want to bring in my next guest. We are joined with the man himself, Jeremy Kuzmarov. Jeremy Kuzmarov is, let me get your bio up. I want people to know who you are. He is a managing editor of Covert Action magazine and author of several books on U.S. foreign policy. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, you are in the process of writing one now, right?
Yeah, well, Dan Kovalek and I have a book. The book is mostly finished. It should be coming out in September or October, called Syria Anatomy of Regime Change.
Oh, that should be good. By the way, on that front, did you see, first, thank you for joining me. I'm about to jump into the show. I always tell the audience that the people I talk to, I'm actually interested in talking to them. So it's not like this kind of mechanical process. It's kind of me being interested in the audience, being along for the ride, and that interest, we just so happen to agree on who we'd like to talk to. So, what is his name? Kevork, I think his name is. He's been on the show once, but he covers issues. That's it. Kevork.
Oh,
Almazian.
Kovalek, yeah, he's
no,
like
it's Kevork Almazian.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he covers Syria. He's been covering it for God knows how long. And, when the government was overthrown, he had been talking about it almost like a year in advance, saying, hey, this looks bad. Assad is not paying attention. XYZ is taking place, and this is going to topple his government if he's not paying attention to it. And lo and behold, everything that he was pointing out came to pass. And he was on TV saying, look, I said this was coming to pass. You can look at my videos months ago. How would I know it? And the government itself didn't know it. He came out recently with an article that came out in Newsline magazine. And it was effectively pointing out that part of the reason that the Syrian government collapsed so fast, because I got to be honest with you, I think anybody that was paying attention to this was just shocked at how quickly the government collapsed. Nobody believed it was going to collapse that quickly. And a lot of people were trying to figure out, okay, how the hell did this happen? So he's reviewing an article coming out in Newsline magazine. And one of the things that he points out is that a lot of this stuff had to do with cyber warfare, that an application apparently had been spread through, let's say, the Syrian military ranks, with the idea or this understanding that, hey, we're helping military families because sanctions and keeping and stealing the oil had got into, let's say, the revenue that was going into the Syrian government for so long, that this was a way for the public to assist military families. But the information where it started off as being innocuous ended up being more specific, like what is your rank, who's your commanding officer, what battalion are you in, and basically being able to create the cyber picture of all of this military personnel and the military structure of Syria itself. And so when the attack took place, it was using cyber warfare to create, let's say, miscommunication, to break links of communication among military chains, and those type of things. Now, I got to be honest with you, I don't know how this would be done that effectively, because you wouldn't think that people would be using social media or their cell phones in order to communicate with military personnel. But putting that to the side for the moment, that it mapped out Syria's military structure. Not to mention you add in, buying off certain members of the military, soldiers who didn't want to fight. Like you have kind of like this kind of cacophony of things that were happening all at once, with the cyber warfare being one of the main components of it. Did you hear about that? I didn't bring you off of that, but when you mentioned the book, it brought it to my mind.
We didn't discuss that too much, but I mean, I think ultimately the sanctions were very significant in
Yeah.
weakening the Syrian population and kind of the will to resist. And I mean, the population was thrust into starvation levels. And the terrorist forces were able to pay. Also, it destroyed Syria's economy. Yeah, combined with the theft of oil that you were describing, and I think Syria lost billions of dollars from the theft of that oil, and it was no longer a functioning economy, and there was just a kind of breakdown in society, and young men were very susceptible to being recruited by the terrorist forces because they had no opportunity, no hope, and the terrorist forces could pay a lot more by that point than the government because they had all this foreign backing and foreign funding. So we discussed kind of those factors and compared it to Nicaragua in the 80s. That was kind of the strategy, to use sanctions to demoralize the Nicaraguan population and Sandinistas, combined with the constant attacks of terrorist forces, the Contras, which was equivalent to the terrorists that was funded by the United States, Turkey, and other countries that just destroyed the country and were just terrorizing the people, and the people just had enough. They wanted an end to that, and with the sanction, they kind of lost their will to resist. And in the Nicaraguan case, ultimately the population voted the Sandinistas out of the power in elections that they were heavily manipulated by the National Endowment for Democracy, was pouring money into the opposition forces, and ultimately kind of a center-right party, and ultimately the sanctions had a huge effect. The Nicaraguan population just wanted relief from that. And look, now that the Trump administration announced an easing of the sanctions, but that's because of the regime change, had been consummated. So,
Yeah, I mean, the idea that Donald Trump is screaming about terrorists in Iran and then shaking the hand of a head chopper is pretty mind-blowing. But hypocrisy is not lost on any of these people. They don't care about hypocrisy at all. One of the things I want to hit on has to do with what seems to be an overwhelming Russia attack coming. Like, it seems to be prepped. Now, I talked about this, I think it was a few weeks ago, where I pointed out that Russia had built up two militaries, that one was on the Finnish border, and brand new militaries, no less, going through drills, training, and everything else. So while they have old equipment or regular equipment pursuing their objectives along like a 2,000-kilometer front, and by the way, speeding in those objectives, meaning they're getting faster and faster in regard to the land and the villages that they've been taking. I mean, God, man, on Slavyangrad, the villages that they've taken, you see like one or two like every day. They're just making gains. While that is taking place, they are simultaneously building two additional militaries, one on the border of Finland, where they're putting up armaments, barricades, and those type of things in order to deal with Finland and Sweden joining NATO. And then another one in reserve that seems to be prepping to join the front. Now, Ukraine is already down manpower. They're already down weaponry. Their air defense seems to be non-existent, at the very least, looking at the attacks that have been taking place over the last several days. Those overwhelming missile attacks seem to be just the beginning of what seems to be a larger campaign that's going to take place. Now, it is being reported right here. So there's an article associated with this. It's no point in me showing the article because the entire article is not given. But I show where this is being taken from. On the front, soldiers are exhausted. We can no longer bear to see our comrades die. But it becomes clear, though, that a part of that points out that there have been multiple these heavy military flights of these cargo planes that have been landing at one of the key military bases, Russian Ingles 2 Air Base, over the course of the last several weeks. This article. So it says another, I guess this is LL-76 transport plane has arrived at Russia's Ingles 2 airport base. It's already the 8th flight in 4 days. Such activity was recorded the first time in the last 3 years, according to enemy sources. So this is Ukraine effectively starting to panic, saying, okay, not only is the war not winding down, but it's been escalating on the front line as Russia's been increasing the pace of its expansions. And they seem to be gearing up for a heavy, heavy push that is coming into the near future. And that is on top of the massive airstrikes that have taken place. And one last thing, Sarah Bills made this point that I didn't really think about, but I think she may be right, that even though Russia, and I think Mark even said it, it's like, well, of course, Russia would say this is a retaliation for the attacks of the drones that were happening on Moscow or against Putin. But Sarah made the point of saying, look, the fact that they were able to launch this many missiles across all of Ukraine, that stuff is not done overnight. It's not like they say, okay, let's do this massive campaign of retaliation. And we're just going to load hundreds of strikes, massive, like the largest air bombardment over the course of the war. And we're going to do it with an hour's notice? No, that stuff was planned in advance, which means if it's planned in advance, it may be a prelude to something else, like in the way they used to call Stalin's organs, right? Where they have these artillery bombardments that just used to last and go on and on and on. Give me your take on this. I mean, have you been seeing reports about some kind of heavy offensive that's supposed to be effectively taking place? I mean, hell, in that article, they even talk about Pokrovsk, how the military, well, you have like these pincers that have started to surround Pokrovsk. There's another village or another city that they mentioned in the article itself. But give me your take. Have you been seeing reports of this heavy offensive that's supposed to be coming up, this major offensive?
A heavy Russian offensive?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I followed some of the same stuff that you're following. I also saw a report that Germany is planning an escalation and to send actual divisions into Ukraine. And I think that was really the goal of U.S. policy all along, because and U.S. UK policy was really feared, and this really goes back a long way, that they fear a Russian-German alliance that could really undercut U.S. UK power. The two countries,
Right.
if they ally together, and that's why they had to destroy the Nord Stream pipeline, because that would really strengthen the Russian economy, and it would mutually strengthen both countries, and it would draw Germany closer into the Russian orbit. And that's really what I think underlie this war in Ukraine, was to create a breach between Russia and Germany, and to weaken, ultimately try and weaken and destroy Russia through sanctions. I mean, this is really an attack on Russia starting in 2014. And parallel the history, the historian, you can go back to the Russian period, the Russian Revolution, when you had at least
Those
6
countries,
allied
yeah.
countries attack Russia. The United States, Britain, France, Japan, Canada were among the countries that attacked Russia to try and undermine or overthrow the Russian Revolution.
They were trying to put the Tsar back in power. I mean, it's just outrageous.
And then they supported Poland during the Russian-Polish War, and even in World War II, there's a lot of, I guess you call it, revisionist scholarship that shows how the Western power actually encouraged Hitler's attack as part of a ploy, the appeasement policy. They really didn't confront Hitler. It was the Western corporation that helped build up Hitler's war machine. And really, they were kind of happy to see Germany attack and destroy Russia and, kill 20 million of its people. So Russia couldn't be a rival to US, UK power. They tried to dominate the world, and Germany was ultimately destroyed in the process. So I think there's a long historical pattern. I think Russia has adapted effectively. I mean, yeah, they're winning the war. They're gaining territory. They've been able to withstand the sanctions pretty effectively. So, I mean, in this case, it's not working that well. But on the other hand, it is creating a conflict. It's bogging the Russians down. They've not been able to succeed rapidly in Ukraine. They are slowly winning. And yeah, at some point, I mean, Ukraine is just reaching a breaking point. I mean, its youth are being sent to their death, much like in World War One. You had that in Europe. At some point, there may be a mutiny. I've already seen a lot of Ukrainian youth don't want to serve in the military. They fled the country. They're trying to evade the draft. They're kidnapping people in Ukraine. Young people are afraid to go to rock concerts. I've read some articles in Kiev because their military recruiters there to kidnap young people who don't want to fight in the army. So it's not clear how much longer Ukraine can continue, especially they're losing territory. They don't have the manpower to sustain this indefinitely, and they've ruined their own country and economy by completely selling out to foreign interests. Zelensky now assassinating, they've had a program of assassination of political opponents. They destroyed whatever figments of democracy. I mean, it was not in any way a model democracy from the time of the fall of the Soviet Union. However, whatever figment of democracy they once had is gone. I mean, Zelensky banned 12 parties, killed opponents. One was killed in Madrid last week. There's even threatening the negotiator, the Russian peace negotiator, has been threatened through this CIA website. So, I mean, Ukraine, it's really not a pretty picture when you look at Ukraine. And I mean, it's people have to ask, what have we got out of this? We've been destroyed as a country. I mean, we've lost our youth. I mean, this is just way beyond the pale what their people have suffered, and the ruination bred on that country is unimaginable for us living now in comfort in the West. So we don't have to send our young people to the front line of war where they're sure to be killed or injured or destroyed. I mean, war destroys people psychologically as well.
Yes.
It could affect people their whole lives. It also breeds a toxic, fascistic
Yes.
environment. People want revenge. When they see war, they lose their humanity, and that's how we see far right movements grow out of wars. And that's what happened after World War One. That produced the cancer of Hitler and Nazism, who wanted revenge and had been dehumanized and blamed internal enemy. Wars often losing side will try and blame scapegoats for their
Yeah.
defeat, and it's easy to blame minority groups or liberals or whoever. So
That's the wild part about that first. There is what is the guy's name? He's a journalist that was living in Nazi Germany as Hitler was taking power. I cannot think of his name to save my life. But he was there reporting and kind of recording what was occurring. It is a fascinating read. There's another book called Germans at War, Nazis at War. No, Germans at War. And it talks about what was going on in the German home front at the exact same time that the war was taking place. Those books are really fascinating because it takes you into this kind of alternate world of how a government, how institutions could get brought under this kind of Nazi rule and Nazi control. And one of the things that they point out in that book is that there was this kind of argument that was taking place. Oh, Jesus Christ. I'm gonna have to come back to it. I can't think of the guy's name. I really want the guy's name. Otherwise, it's the stab in the back myth that was taking place. But beyond the stab in the back myth, a lot of what Hitler was doing, even in, he was the architect. He was Hitler's architect at a certain point. He has a book, a memoir on his own. Some of the stuff in the memoir is not true, but whatever, most of it is. But you get this sense of insecurity complex that runs a lot through Nazi ideology, especially in Hitler's mind. Like, oh, this is going to be better than Paris. This is going to be greater than, you know, what the Parisians could come up with in regards to their cities. And yeah, we're going to have this take place in Paris in a train car. Like, it's almost like they were coming up under this notion of losing a First World War, getting hit with the war debt. And a lot of the stuff was repudiation to the humiliation of having to pay back all of this money, having to pay back or getting branded with the war debt and being created over the war. Like, a lot of that stuff came from guilt, or not even guilt, humiliation. It is, I guess my point is, you're right. You're right. It creates all sorts of eddies and personalities. But that's not really the way we think about it, though. That's not the reason why the West does it. I mean, we use fascists for our own ends. I mean, you call it revisionist history, and I guess some of it is that it was understood that, at the very least, the Russians believe it, that the reasons that they didn't invade, or that they didn't give Stalin this invasion to take pressure off of the Russian military, was because they wanted the Russians and the Nazis, or let's say the Soviets and the Nazis, to fight it out. That does seem to be the case. And they only really got involved in Berlin when they realized, oh my God, the Soviets are going to take it all. Okay, we need to get involved now in order to, at the very least, be able to divide Berlin and Germany up along some kind of contact line. No, you're not wrong on that. I guess my thing is, the Russians didn't want to fight this war. And we used Nazis as the tip of the spear. We ignored any notion of Putin trying to bring this stuff to a close. And in this kind of perspective of, okay, well, the Russians are slowly making progress, that may be true, but it's also true that they've been fighting it with one arm behind their back. Like, their objective wasn't to do what we did in Iraq, for example, or do what we did in Syria, for example. Like, their objective wasn't, we want to flatten Ukraine. We want to flatten Kiev. We want to decimate the population. That wasn't the way they were fighting the war. They called it a special military operation. And I know some people would be like, okay, yeah, dude, it's an invasion. It is an invasion, but the special military operation, there's a reason that they call it that, as opposed to just a basic, straightforward war. And let me get your take on that. I mean, it seems that their aperture and their willingness to accept civilian casualties has gone up over the course of the war. Whereas in the very beginning, they had somewhat, what they would allow a strike on has somewhat changed. As an example, when they went after the people at that restaurant, and I mean, granted, Kiev was using human shields because they were having a military meeting with mercenaries and everything else at a restaurant where they know other people and patrons were going to be there. Russia hits the restaurant, and then as they cart the people away to the hospital, Russia hits the hospital. Okay, they wouldn't have done that in the first year. I don't even think they would have done that in the second year. They're doing it now. And the air bombardment that's taken place, hundreds of airstrikes, I think it was like 300 and something. I mean, just punishing attacks where Ukraine's air defense seems to be wholly either insufficient or just non-existent at this point. Well, they've been pounding and pounding and pounding. And so it seems like either their tolerance of this war, they're getting sick of it, either they're getting annoyed because it doesn't seem like there's any penchant for any kind of honest broker in the West where they can actually talk to, where they realize, okay, we're going to have to end this on the battlefield. There is no negotiations that are going to take place. And even the memorandum that they're doing is going to go nowhere, that it's pure theater. Give me your take on that. And I guess you could skip the first part about the First World War and everything else. But give me your take on the secondary part of the aperture and willingness to accept civilian casualties seems to be increasing over the course as the war expands, especially since Ukraine has been killing civilians left and right, going back to 2014. But also this idea that in their minds, it seems to be crystallizing, we're going to have to end this on the battlefield. There would not be negotiations.
Well, yeah, and firstly, I think the person you were referring to is Albert Speer, who is Hitler's.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you. Thank
he
you.
wrote a kind of reflective memoir years later. He had been a supporter of Hitler as
Yeah.
architect, and then he was in prison in the Nuremberg trial for a period, and then he got out, and he wrote a kind of thoughtful memoir.
It was a good book.
Yeah,
Good book.
exactly. And analyzing the psychology of those who supported Nazism. And as far as the point about negotiation, yeah, I mean, I think we've discussed that on the show. I mean, look, these negotiations have gone nowhere. Neither the American or Ukrainian would acknowledge any Russian security interests and guarantees. And I mean, look, I mean, America last time the United States had a good leader was in World War II. Franklin Roosevelt understood the Soviet security consideration at the end of the
Right.
war, and you had Henry Wallace was, I think, key figure in the Roosevelt administration. He was really a very highly intelligent man. If only we had people of his caliber. In this day and age, we can resolve these conflicts. Because Wallace was a highly intelligent man who traveled, to different countries like Russia, got to know the people, understood their perspective, learned about their point of view, and used that as a way to negotiate, durable peace. And you had the Yalta Agreement was a framework for post-war security and peaceful world order. Unfortunately, it was undermined when Wallace was ousted in a coup after FDR got sick. They ousted Wallace in a coup in the Democratic Party convention, brought in Truman, who was a simpleton who was beholden to these Cold Warrior hawks, Wall Street types. And actually, James Roosevelt wrote a book, FDR's son, said, my father knew how to control these kind of people. But Truman, could not do that. And, that's what led to the Cold War and all the horrors that resulted, including the arming of fascist forces in Ukraine under the Operation Rollback. And that's, continuity in policy we see today, that anti-Russia policy. And, the negotiation gone nowhere because the Trump administration, there's no vision, there's no people of any intellectual caliber or moral integrity in the Trump administration to really say, look, we recognize certain Russian security consideration, we recognize the Russian point of view, and let's hammer out an agreement that takes into account Russian security concerns, whether it's Ukraine, barring Ukraine from joining NATO, to demilitarizing Ukraine, to acknowledging Russian territorial gains. Those are the things that would have to happen for a durable peace to occur. But I mean, the Ukrainian side, I think, is under the illusion that they can keep getting weapons and somehow strike a blow at Russia, even though as we've discussed, they're losing territory. They're using their youth. Their economy is being destroyed. Their democracy is gone. So Ukraine really is a loser, but they're because they keep getting these weapons that is sustaining them. So they're not interested in negotiation. But the foreign power keep giving the weapons, and they're unwilling to grant any concessions to Russia and really sit down and try and hammer out an agreement that would resolve this, a
I know, but
political
could they?
solution. So
Could an
the
American
fight will
president
go
really
on.
even do that?
It's ugly on all sides. Fighting a war, unfortunately, and it's not to defend killing a civilian because it is a
Yeah.
war crime, but that is going to happen. And Ukraine side has committed huge atrocities, and the Russian side has committed their share of atrocities, and that's going to go on until there's negotiated settlement.
I know, but can an American president even do that? Like, how do
Well,
you?
they'd be under a lot of pressure, but if they were a real visionary, I mean, Trump, look, there is the political capital to do it. The public has tired of the war.
Yeah.
The American public, they don't see any gain. I mean, it's a lot of American taxpayer dollar going there, billions and billions of dollars, when the United States is falling apart. I mean, it needs investment in infrastructure. You know, good government in the United States is going to really invest in next generation infrastructure, next generation public transport, high speed rail, in the healthcare system, in the education system. You know, pay teachers more. You know, that's what's needed, not billions and billions of dollars. And if you talk to Americans, even conservative Americans, they see that they want the government working for them. They might want to lower, you know, there may be arguments about the tax levels among liberal and conservative and certain programs, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of people on both ends of the aisle don't want to see wasted money in a war that's like a Vietnam War, you know, because you can't win. And Americans like a winner, you know. They want to see a quick victory. They're not necessarily averse to these wars if they can see a quick, you know, glorious victory, because some are maybe mesmerized by the military and military technology. But this is not being achieved. This war has dragged on for years and years, and it's a drain on the taxpayer. It's accelerating the debt. A lot of Americans are also very concerned about the debt, and this is just accelerating the debt. And so there's a huge block of the population that wants an end to this. So Trump has the political capital, and if he used the bully pulpit to explain the situation, to explain the failings of some past administration, he can even use it to his political advantage. And then he goes out and develops a concrete plan, you know, gets some experts to draft a Minsk type framework, because there was the Minsk agreements that was a workable solution. But he's not doing that. We don't see any leadership on his part. I mean, let's face facts. Trump is a person of very, very low intellectual caliber himself. His tweets have the look of a 10-year-old, and he rails against the mythic Marxist radical left that doesn't even exist. And then who are the people he has in his administration, foreign policy team? They're a bunch of thugs, you know, real estate billionaires, the far right anti-Castro Marco Rubio, who's tied with the Fanjul, this sugar dynasty billionaires. Rubio is a man of very low intellectual caliber, war hawk. You know, so there's just nobody of any substance or value in that administration. So it's just going to drag on. There's a larger strategic vision. I mean, I think ultimately they want to pivot to China, but I think the strategy all along has been to bleed Russia in the quagmire, like Russia was bled in Afghanistan, weaken the country, and also create a breach with Germany so that a German-Russian alliance wouldn't develop to really challenge U.S. Anglo-American power. And that's why there's still affinity with Britain, because the U.S. and Britain are kind of working together with that strategy. So really, they want this war to keep dragging on, and they're happy for more civilian casualty. You know, history show that these Western elites have no concern about civilians or human life, really. They're willing to sacrifice huge numbers of people for their geostrategic designs.
Yeah, agreed. Well, a few things. One, even if the war wasn't going on, they wouldn't be putting money into high-speed rail, education, increased wage. They wouldn't still put money into those things. Like, we don't believe in those things as a country. The people may want those things, but that's not what elites believe in. They just don't do it. Even the war, it's not like the war is being funded by anything. This is just unfunded debt that they're going into. Hell, Iraq was unfunded by $10 trillion. So, you know, it's not like if the Iraq war didn't take place, George Bush would have been like, hey, let's invest in high-speed rail. They still wouldn't do it. The bridges would still be collapsing. We send our money to oligarchs, not to the population. Even under Obama, who was supposed to be a, quote, liberal, when the houses market collapsed, what did Obama do? Obama could have, all right, I'm taking this massive check and I'm going to sit it out to the American homeowners, and the homeowners can pay the banks. And so the banks are made whole and the homeowners are made whole. Obama didn't do that. Yet all these people lose their homes when Obama gave all of this money to the banks, and the banks decided to hoard the money and not loan the money out, leaving the homeowners on the hook with the banks being made whole. So it's just not the way these people think. They don't think in those terms. I understand what you're saying. You could take $10 trillion. What could you do with $10 trillion on a domestic front? A lot, right? The other part, I am not of mind. I don't know if Trump even wants to end the war. You're right. He's a person of very low intelligence. And it's very possible that he only knows what somebody tells him. And so when Kellogg goes to him and say, hey, Trump, here's a 22-point plan, the Russians will totally take this. And then he's shocked when the Russians say, F off. And then they see Sim Witkoff again. And eventually at the last point, they said, dude, if this is what you're bringing again, you shouldn't even come. Like, don't even come. What's your point? And then he said, okay, well, we're going to get Trump to talk to Putin because that's what we need. As if Putin was going to say something different to Trump that Witkoff said, meaning the entire Russian government is on the same page, even Medvedev. Just because the US government, each person says something different, doesn't mean that's the way the Russian government functions. So Putin, who has no ability to go backwards, told Trump exactly what they said in the peace negotiations. Here are our terms of surrender. He might not have used those terms of surrender, but this is what we need you to do to end the conflict. In which case, Donald Trump comes out and says, okay, I got a memorandum that is going to take place because that's the best you can get out of it. It's so ludicrous that I don't know if I honestly believes that that's something that's going to end the conflict. Like, I keep thinking to myself, he can't be this stupid to think that Russia is going to be okay with you putting US troops at a Russian power plant. Who thinks that up as being legitimate? And then he's shocked when Russia says, yeah, this is a non-starter, but we can continue negotiations. And he's like, oh my God, he throws a tantrum like a child when you point out, and when Russia says, okay, this is what we need for a ceasefire. Stop giving intelligence, stop giving them weapons, stop Europe giving them weapons, no NATO troops in Ukraine. Effectively, the most rational thing in the world, as opposed to Russia is supposed to allow you to build up another military in Ukraine during a ceasefire so Ukraine can do this fool's errand again in a month or two. It's almost like you have there are no reasonable actors in the West, which makes me think that their intention is not to end the war at all. The intention is to keep the war going. Give me your take on that first before I go to something else. I want to make a slight pivot on this into Germany, because you mentioned Germany. And I want to know whether you think, I had John Kiriakou on the show yesterday, and John was like, he didn't think that Russia would hit Germany. I think John is wrong. I think John is so wrong that it is astonishing that if Germany and those Taurus missiles are fired into Russia and one of those things hit Moscow or another city, I think Russia would bomb the living shit out of Germany, at the very least the factory where those things came out of, and if necessary, closer to home, in order to make this point that this is a red line. This is something that we told you is a no-no. But give me your thoughts on the first part about whether or not you think that Trump actually even wants to end the war, or at the very least his administration even wants to end the war. And next, this thing on Germany about whether or not Russia would hit Germany if indeed Germany passes that Taurus missile to Ukraine.
Well, on the first point, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I agree with what you said early on. Yeah, I mean, that's what they should do, invest in. If it was a democratic government, they would invest in infrastructure and education, healthcare, but it's not a democratic government. It's an oligarchy run by large corporation, weapons contractors, Wall Street banks, and they have their own agendas and own interests, and they use the government for their own purposes, and the public gets screwed time and time again. And yeah, whether a Democrat or Republican really makes no difference, as you point out. So I think your comments are very good, and that helps answer the question. If it was a democratic government and if there are compassionate people in the government, yes, they would want to end the war. I mean, this war has caused a terrible human cost for the Russian and Ukrainian populations, and
Agreed.
especially the people of eastern Ukraine. So any real human being would try and end this conflict and work out some kind of political framework that would prevent future wars between Russia and Ukraine. But instead, since we have these oligarchs, inhuman corporations who profit off endless war and whose goal is American global dominance, and since Russia is a potential rival to the United States in an oil-rich area. And don't forget, yeah, Russia is a country with rich, very rich natural resources. And the oligarchy and Wall Street and corporate interests, their main goal ultimately is to access Russian natural resources.
Right
And
there.
that's why they want to weaken Putin, because Putin was more of a national, he reasserted control. They were, under Boris Yeltsin, they were starting to gain access to those resources. He was a weak leader who kowtowed to the West. And then Putin was supposed to be his successor. Well, he was anointed and elevated as Yeltsin's successor, but he was more, at his core, more of a Russian nationalist. And he started to restore Russian economic sovereignty and restore Russian power and confidence. And that didn't sit well with American oligarchs who want to control Russia's economy and keep Russia weak so they can dominate the entire Eurasian region, which is rich in oil and gas. And, you know, if you go back to this grand strategist that the elite elevate, like Brzezinski and Halford Mackinder in the case of the British Empire, they all, and Brzezinski is not an original thinker. He draws off Halford Mackinder, who was a strategist for the British Empire, and they placed heavy value on controlling Eurasian region as the key to world domination. So that's the main agenda. So ending, you know, if war is good for that agenda because it bogged the Russian down, creates a breach with Germany. That's what they fear. Strong Russia allied with Germany will thwart the designs for control of that Eurasian region and general dominance of the world. So that's what they're trying to prevent. So they want to keep the war going in Ukraine, and they're, you know, supporting these governments in Germany that are provoking or, you know, threatening outright conflict on Russia. So whether Russia would, you know, I think Putin is a very pragmatic and cautious leader. And I don't think, I mean, I would agree with Kiriakou that I don't think he's going to be prone to attack Germany. That could breed, you know, cataclysmic consequences on Russia or an escalation of war against Russia. I think Putin has shown himself to be a calm and a very pragmatic leader who's not overly aggressive. I mean, there are hawks. You know, as much as the media builds him up ridiculously, the new Hitler, and that he's going
Yeah.
to has this plan to invade Europe and Ukraine is. I mean, they've reinvoked the domino theory. You know, Ukraine is first, and then when he gets his way in Ukraine, he's going to invade other European countries. I mean, that's not true at all. He was totally provoked in
Agreed.
Ukraine, and he's actually a moderate in the Russian landscape. I mean, there were some, you know, Russians who criticized him for being overly cautious and overly moderate. So I don't think he's going to attack Germany. But I mean, every country does have a breaking point. He's got to defend his country, and he can't continue to. You know, Russia cannot, if they're continuously attacked as they've been, they're going to respond. That's why you see the more aggressive response in Ukraine, because Ukraine upped the ante. You know, the U.S. provided them with these long-range missiles, and the CIA helped develop Ukraine's drone industry, and Ukraine started carrying out drone attacks in Moscow and increasingly missile attacks on Russia. So they're going to respond in kind. And yeah, a good movie was Oliver Stone made a good movie called The Putin Diaries a few years ago, where
Saw
he
that. Yeah.
visited with Putin, and you got a sense a bit about Putin and his character and strategy. And you know, he said every action does have a reaction, and a lot of Russian policies have been purely reactive to Western aggression, using Ukraine as their proxy. And unfortunately, the war is not framed in that way in the United States. You know, it's framed as a war of Russian aggression, But more and more voices have punctured the narrative and the myth of an unprovoked Russian invasion. So more
Just be
people are
clear, though.
seeing the light.
You're saying that if German missiles fired by Germans, which they will be, are fired into Moscow, that Russia doesn't respond to that?
Well,
Because
that I don't
that's their
know. I
point of
mean,
view, by the way.
if Russia is directly attacked, I didn't catch that. Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're
Well,
gonna.
I mean, look,
It's a
if
possibility. I
Germany
don't know
hands
how they would
if Germany hands
respond,
off
though.
a Taurus missile to Ukraine, Germany has to fire that missile. Full stop. There's no way around it. Putin has already said that you cannot fire that missile without the support of Germany. Germany, in the leaked video or leaked audio, even said themselves, hey, how can we fire this without our hands being on it? Because their hands are on it if they fire it. So the Russian point of view is, if a Taurus missile hits Moscow, it was Germany that fired it. Just like if a Storm Shadow missile hits Moscow, it was the UK that fired it. Or for that matter, Scout with France. Those France that fired it. How could they not respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately they will respond. I don't know what kind of, if they're going to attack Germany directly. I can't say for sure, but yeah, they will respond.
What stops Germany from giving them more missiles if Germany is not held responsible? To me, this is
Yeah.
a logic issue. That's why I'm asking it in this way, because this is the way I think about it. How do you, meaning, if the Russian perspective, even Putin himself said as much, if you fire these missiles at us, you are doing it. This is NATO's direct involvement into the war. So from the Russian point of view, NATO enters the war directly the moment those missiles are fired into Moscow.
Yeah, and I mean, I think all along what we've seen is that they're intent on provoking a world war, and that's why these leaders are very, very dangerous, and it's really now escalating to a very, very dangerous level. And people have been warning about this for years, and they were shunned to the side. Whether the Ritters, Scott Ritter was UN weapons inspector, an insider, and he's been at the forefront of warning for years and years, and people like John Marsheimer and others, but they're never given any attention, in the mainstream United States, and this is really escalating to an extremely dangerous level, to the point where we may have a world war, and that seems to be what our leaders want. And if you look at the history of the past world wars, this is the kind of way it started. I mean, and it would provoke in the West. I mean, there's a long debate among historians, but there are more and more historians who recognize that it was Western country that provoked World War I and even helped provoke World War II. And they're designed a global hegemony, and that's what leads to these catastrophes.
Yeah, I agree. I disagree with John because the logic of it seemed to compels itself. And I understand that it could create a provocation by NATO, but the provocation is NATO. Like, the entire point of the special military operation was because NATO overthrew the government of Ukraine. That's a provocation. They blew off the Minsk agreements. That's a provocation. All of these things are provocations. All of these things are some level acts of aggression. NATO was killing ethnic Russian Ukrainians in the East. Again, that is provocations. And they're doing this stuff knowing full well that at some point, either Russia responds or they allow Ukraine to be added into NATO, which was always a red line, which was a red line back in 2008, which was a red line when the Minsk agreement, meaning it was a red line all along the way. And even though there's propaganda that come out where the West tries to justify its behavior and its actions, propaganda is one thing, reality is something else. If Marouf is dumb enough to believe his population is going to be okay with him firing missiles into Moscow with the idea that Moscow may respond by hitting German factories, which, by the way, the entire government says they're going to do. Margarita Simonier, Putin has said it. Medvedev obviously has said it. And even one of the Duma members says, look, we planned for this. We assumed it would come to this point. So in their mind, we are already at war with NATO. In their minds, we are already at war with Germany. And if we allow you to fire one missile, what stops you from firing 10? Or what stops the UK from firing 10? or what stops France from firing 10? The moment that you call what they consider to be a bluff. I don't know how you allow it, which is why I disagree. Regardless of what happens, it seems impossible for a world leader to allow countries to willy-nilly fire missiles. And again, this is not Ukraine being given a drone and they firing it into Moscow. That's one thing. Putin has effectively accepted that as Ukraine holding the thing, even if the US or one of the Western countries are given an intelligence. Putin has accepted, okay, I would live with this because I don't want to provoke a world war. But if it takes you to do it, that's different. That's the distinction. And I don't know how you get around that. I just don't know how you get around that. The moment that you allow 5 of those, where you've effectively Germany fires 5 missiles, and you don't respond, oh, what does that mean? Like, what are you in for? That gives NATO free license to take pop shots at your country because they accept that you're too afraid to respond to it. And they already take pragmatism for weakness. So it seems like that is the pathway. If NATO wants to provoke a world war, that's the way to do it. I could be wrong. I could totally be wrong on this.
No, I agree with you. Yeah. I mean, yeah, ultimately, yeah, if what you're describing takes place, then yeah. No, I agree with you. And yeah, the intent seems to be, from what we've seen over a 10-year period, every intent is to provoke more and more war and escalate that war.
Yeah.
And to, and that's why they've heavily propagandized the American public. I mean, this is a conditioning that has gone on for about 10 to 15 years now. And it's equivalent to the First World War, when they conditioned the public to hate Germany. And they got even the public to turn on German Americans, who were very productive and successful immigrant group in America. And there were lynchings that were carried out against German citizens, German residents in the United States. And that was because, the Wilson administration had set up the Committee on Public Information as a vast government propaganda effort to malign and demonize Germany. And it worked. And we've seen a parallel, we saw a parallel in the First Cold War with the anti-communist fervor, McCarthyism. And that's what we're seeing now with the Russia. We've seen it over 10 years, where this hatred has been whipped up toward Putin, this demonization of Putin, and this anti-Russia hysteria that, Russia Gate was a huge psychological warfare operation, essentially, to demonize Russia, malign it, and depict it as this aggressor, Putin as this devil type figure. And the liberal left just ate it up, as we've seen.
They're lunatics.
And I think that's the key, because that, is a traditional opposition to U.S. wars and imperialistic foreign policy. So they've neutered the anti-war left. And so that paves the way. There's no opposition to the kind of policy you're describing that are leading us into World War III. And it's becoming very close now to that. So
I agree with you. I think the only difference is, it's one thing to be anti-communist. That's bad by itself. It's another thing to be anti-Russian, which is, you effectively demonizing the person versus the ideology. Like Nazi ideology fell apart, kind of, even though the German state remained. And the Soviet Union fell apart, even though, the states themselves remained. Just like the US. The US government may fall apart in regards to this capitalistic, neocon-based sociopaths that may collapse, but the US may still remain as an entity. I don't know, man. It's a little bit different. But I agree with you. I definitely agree with you. I want to go to your article before we leave, because this has been, and I guess this gets to kind of what you're saying, even with that part, this kind of demonization thing. So you get the murder of a Ukrainian politician. I don't know if my audience knows it. The American audience may not know this, but Ukraine is a kill list. State paid for, by the way. Various people on that kill list, like Scott Ritter, he's on that kill list. I forget some of the other names that's on it, but there are American names that are on that list. And they go and murder these people when they get the opportunity to do so. From the standpoint of Zelensky's political opposition, those people either get put into a cage, those people get shot in the face, or those people leave the country. So Arestovich, for example, is one of those guys that's left the country. Andrei Telezhenko, the one who comes on my show all the time, he left the country in order to avoid being murdered because his friends effectively were murdered. Many of these people were even part of Maidan, right? Telezhenko was part of the Maidan coup. Arestovich, part of the Maidan coup, or at the very least was Zelensky's spin doctor at some point along the process. One of the opposition politicians that just so happened had left the country, was in Spain, gets murdered. It is obviously a Ukrainian that did it. And instead of them calling a spade, Western media is basically silent about it. And they use this idea of him being either a traitor, either a fraudulent business dealings. Basically, they demonize the man that was murdered. They don't want to call a spade to the fact that this was a political opponent of Zelensky that Ukraine most likely murdered to prevent him from being political opposition to Zelensky. And they effectively run with this propaganda campaign of demonizing the person as opposed to calling a spade and saying, hey, they murdered political opposition that was in Europe, for God's sake. This is the article that you wrote on this. Go into this for me while we have a few minutes. CIA-linked website celebrates murder of Ukrainian opposition politicians.
Well, this politician, Andrei Portnov, he was a lawyer and a member of parliament in Ukraine. He was a lawyer for the Tomoshenko legal team. And then he was he was an aide to Viktor Yanukovych, who was overthrown in the Maidan coup. Although he came back to the country in 2018, I believe, he fled as a result of the coup, where a lot of the Yanukovych officials were threatened and were killed. And that's when, Marouf was set up, this website. And the website, says it's based in Langley, Virginia, which is the headquarters of the CIA. And they have mugshots of people. And when they're murdered, they're crossed off. And Portnoy was, there's a long investigation on the website about him. And he's accused of being a traitor and, agent for Russian influence in Ukraine. And then he had to flee again. He came back in 2018 because he was on the outs of the Poroshenko government, but I guess he saw some hope in Zelensky. But then he fled again, and then they hunted him down, and he was murdered, mafia-style hit. Well, after he dropped off his kids from school, assassin came out and took him out. And this is a similar hit was made on Ilya Kiva, where the head of the Socialist Party in Ukraine, in the parliament, and he was murdered in a Moscow park. And he was on that hit list, and they bragged about his assassination. So, this is going on in front of our eyes. And, the U.S. media, accused Putin of a lot of the murders that there's no evidence he committed, including Navalny, the opposition figure who died in a Russian jail. But even U.S. intelligence concluded that Putin, there was no evidence that Putin had directly ordered Navalny's death or was behind his death. But here we have a website where they're openly celebrating the death of these Ukrainian opposition political figures. And, some of the media, my article went into the media was so biased. It's what I was describing, this anti-Russia campaign and how the public has been conditioned to hate Russia, to view the Putin regime as the epitome of evil and autocracy, and to sugarcoat and whitewash the Ukrainian regime. And, like CNN's coverage and The Guardian made no reference to the Marouf website, or there was no suggestion in any way that Ukraine had anything to do with his murder, as if he was just killed in some random act. According to those accounts, one said, "Oh, he had a corrupt business dealing, and he was probably killed over that." And
Can I read what you wrote on this, by the way? Because you nail it. It says a CNN article by Al Goodman, Lauren Kent, and Jack Guy characteristically made it seem like Portnoy was the victim of a random crime. What are the chances that Ukraine is a kill list? This guy's a Ukrainian dissident. They've been killing people on this kill list, but this has just so happened to be a random act of violence. Is that it emphasized that he had been sanctioned by the United States government beginning in 2021 for corruption and bribery, but under the order of Magnitsky, making him seem like the bad guy. CNN's coverage was similar with Kiev Independent, which depicted Portnoy's assassination as retribution for Portnoy's alleged bad acts. Radio Free Europe, who Europe, by the way, is now paying for because the money is being pulled away by the Trump administration. A CNI front, and yes, it's a direct CNI front, quoted from SBU or SBU agents suggest that Portnoy was killed because of his allegedly corrupt business dealings. This is kind of like somebody being murdered and they say, yeah, here's a picture of him selling weed. It's like, that has nothing to do with the guy being murdered, right? It says BBC reported that, quote, although Ukraine intelligence services have been linked to several killings of Russian and occupied areas of Ukraine, a fatal attack in Spain in February last year was linked to the Russian hitmen. Why would Russia murder a guy who's political opposition in Ukraine? I'm pointing out that your reporting on this is pointing out the way that these Western outlets reported this guy's killing.
Yeah, and the Guardian flipped it. They really had no discussion at all of Portnoy and how Ukraine could have been behind it, or was. I mean, all the evidence pointed to Ukraine, but they had no discussion that. They went into a discussion of some cases, like they mentioned. They said, "Oh, look, like they just mentioned the assassination. They said, oh, well, Russia." There was a guy who mailed bombs to Spanish officials, and some social media posts revealed that he made some pro-Russian statements. Like that, what did that have to do with Portnoy's assassination? And then the link with Russia in that case was so tenuous, and there's no evidence at all that the Kremlin had anything to do with those bombings. And then they mentioned one other case of a Russian pilot who had switched to the Ukrainian side, who got murdered at some point, but they didn't provide any evidence or indication that Russia, the Russian government had anything to do with those killings. So why bring that up? And they're just evading any discussion of the Ukrainian government role in Portnoy's death. And this is the Guardian, is supposed to be more left wing. In the past, I mean, they opposed the Iraq War and had some critical coverage of certain U.S. and UK policies, but yeah, it's just a sad state. I mean, the lack of journalistic integrity, because RT did have a report that, I mean, and yeah, you can say, oh, that's the Russian government, but it was all factual statements, and they mentioned the Marouf website, and if you go on the website, you see this 9-part series accusing him of being a traitor, and all kinds of mud flinged at him, and you see the death list that they have. So, I mean, that was an accurate report. And there are Ukrainian other opposition politicians, spoke out on X and said, I'm also on the target. And they said, it's 99% the Ukrainian government is behind this. They're killing opposition figures. Zelensky's going to have elections at some point because he's kept delaying and delaying. So his strategy seems to be to kill off members of the opposition party, so he has no real opposition when he finally decides to stage the election that was supposed to have occurred several years ago. So these are other Ukrainian politicians are speaking out on X, and many of them are in hiding or in exile. And this is supposedly the model democracy as is presented in U.S. media, and that is just a joke. And this is another Phoenix operation going on. There's a long pattern, and Douglas Valentine wrote an outstanding book called The Phoenix Program, exposing, it was based on a lot of interviews with Phoenix operatives and document that showed a murder program that was carried out by the CIA in collaboration with South Vietnamese forces. And it also targeted government officials because the National Liberation Front was setting up governments in area that had been liberated in Vietnam, and those leaders of those government, local administrations were being murdered under the Phoenix Project. And in the Ukraine case, it's politicians, in some cases, of very high stature, like Portnoy was a top aide to Yanukovych and was a very big figure in that government, and had been a head of the legal team of a previous Ukrainian president. So this is a very powerful and influential guy, and he's being assassinated in the light of day after dropping
Yeah.
his kids off at school. I mean, this is just unbelievable. And there's no outcry. And, you know, it showed the fraud of the alternative media. I mean, why your show is so important, because the alternative media in the U.S. didn't cover this at all. You know, Democracy Now!, a lot of activists who are involved in activist causes or against past war, they tune into Democracy Now!. Nothing about this at all, or any of these assassinations. It's all Israel all the time and nothing else.
Well,
And that's
they
kind
bring
of
in,
shady. And
they just say
then,
Russia, and that's
yeah.
that seems to whitewash any underlying thing.
And that's why
Germany,
the activist movements in the U.S. have not been on the ball with it. There have been no protests, that we're funding a government that hunts people in exile and assassinates them. And we call that a model democracy. But, you know,
it's
the
outrageous.
people are unaware, like the students who are protesting the Palestine stuff. They don't know about this. I went to a forum with them and I asked them, well, what about, why don't you broaden your protest? And a lot of these universities are supporting Ukraine, like MIT. I did a study,
Mhm.
and the weapons they're developing for Israel, they're also developing for Ukraine. They're even running intelligence operations out of MIT. MIT students are designing computer programs to get weapons more rapidly to the front lines in Ukraine. So this is something that students at MIT should be outraged that their university is complicit in all the war crimes in Ukraine and the prolongation of war that's leading us to World War III, as we've discussed. But complete silence.
They're liberals. They're liberals.
Well, they're just not informed. I think a lot of the students are well intentioned who are protesting the Israeli genocide. They just are not well informed about this because, like, there's no alternative media covering it, the
Yeah.
mainstream media, and they bought into this anti-Russia propaganda, much like a lot of the population did throughout the Cold War. So it's very powerful.
Jeremy, you are fantastic. And this was a great article. And you're absolutely right. I saw when this first happened, and I saw one of the opposition figures talking about it, effectively pointing out how they were chest thumping the fact that the man was murdered in broad daylight and how he's next, or how
Yeah.
Aristovich is next. Jeremy Kuzmarov, he is managing editor of Covert Action magazine and author of several books on U.S. foreign policy. Check him out. When I cut this video, I'll put that article below so people can find it and read it for themselves. Jeremy, thank you for this, man. You be safe, okay?
Thanks, you too.
Have a good one. All right. That was great by Jeremy. Yeah, he's right. It's outrageous. For whatever reason, people don't seem to make the distinction with Russia. There he is, my man, Esteban Carrillo, coming on at the last minute for me. Thank you, my man. I really appreciate it. And just so people know, Esteban Carrillo, he's Ecuadorian journalist, currently writing for The Cradle. Previously with Telesur English. Esteban, man, how you doing this morning? I'm sorry for the delay. I
okay,
had
Jamal.
a
It's all
bad
good.
experience once where I cut somebody off. I think it was Kofi. And the audience was like, oh, boo on you, man. How dare you cut him off in that way? It's like, okay. You have to let
No,
people
it's
finish
all
their
good.
bits.
I'm doing good. It's always good to join you, and good morning to everyone who's joining us, or whatever time zone you are in.
I'm glad you could join me, man. There is one of the wild things. I'm sweating here. I forgot to cut the AC on. And I'm not in the States. One of the wild things that have taken place has to do with, once again, as I pointed out, Israel was going to back out of the deal.
Mhm.
Everybody in the media, for whatever reason, was acting as if, hey, we have a deal between Hamas and the US. And I said that deal is nonsense. It makes no sense. It's completely contradictory in terms, considering Israel is building camps to put people in. Trump is on board for them being put in the camps with the idea of either killing them or getting them out of the country. So the idea that you're signing a deal that claims that Israel is going to leave Gaza seems to be nonsense. Okay, fast forward a couple of days later, you get the reporting that Israel put a poison pill in the deal, and it effectively changed the context of the deal. So what would most likely happen is, okay, we'll exchange hostages, so we'll get all our people back, we'll reload, and then we'll go back on a killing spree, which is what Netanyahu effectively wants, and what Trump wants, considering Trump helped set up those pins all throughout Gaza. All right. One of the wild parts of that is reporting by the Gray Zone and by the Cradle, for that matter. You guys have been Johnny on the spot on this. In fact, I saw it on the Cradle before I saw it anywhere else. But there is a shadowy organization with the initials GHF. And people were like, what the hell is that? Now, people could see Hebrew writing on some of the boxes. So they figured, okay, well, obviously Israel is supplying the food. What kind of boondoggle is this? You get rid of humanitarian organizations, and then you support your own businesses by feeding starving people that you helped starve in the first place. That is grotesque. But as the article points out, this group is funded by Mossad and the Israeli government.
Yes.
Go into this the guy's, all black, like he's, incognito. Go into this for me, because I don't know if the audience even knows exactly what we're talking about on this.
So this is just the way we need to understand the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Is such a magnanimous name. How can anybody speak ill about something with such a good name? It's this shady organization created by the U.S. They established it both in Delaware and in Switzerland. That is essentially a substitution for the actual, paths and the systems in place to deliver aid to Gaza. And the clearest way to understand what the GHF is simply remember the pier. Remember Joe Biden's pier from last year, the Gaza aid pier, that at the end of the day,
they spent what, $3 million, and the thing fell apart in like a month.
More, like way more, like tens of millions of dollars. Because remember, it kept being dismantled, it kept being washed away. There was like from the beginning, every single humanitarian agency said, "This is crap. This is not going to work. This is going to promote the displacement and is going to just continue to spread famine." How did the U.S. sell the pier? They sold it as the humanitarian aid pier that is finally going to let aid into Gaza. Although everybody knew that it was also meant to displace Palestinians. It was supposed to open up a path to start removing Palestinians from there. At the end of the day, what did the Gaza aid pier achieve? In about 3 or so months of operation, it got 1 day's worth of food into Gaza. One day's worth of food. Dozens of U.S. soldiers injured. At least one died, according to our Reuters. I think it was Reuters, the New York Times report from a couple of weeks ago that finally started, giving more information about that whole debacle, that whole fiasco. And infamously, the Gaza aid pier was used to launch an attack and a raid of the Nuseirat refugee camp. Remember when the Israeli army killed about 300 Palestinians to rescue, I think, 6 captives. Right? And this was launched from the pier with the help of the United States. Okay, so remember that. Remember the pier. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is just simply a reformulation of the same idea. Let Israel, with the support of the United States, control the humanitarian aid that is going into Gaza. Mind you, today, the UN says 100% of the population of Gaza is at risk of famine. There is no food in Gaza. The only food they've been able to get in is flour. And there's no way to cook the flour. So the GHF starts operation on Monday, right? After the CEO, Jay Wood, this former U.S. Marine, resigns. GHF also established by a gentleman who was in charge of training the Contras in Nicaragua, of training these, paramilitary death squads. Who was in charge of the, he was there for the invasion of Kabul. He was there for the Iraq war. It's already, it shows you, from the establishment of this organization, aka an NGO, that is, run by the former CEO of MasterCard and like some officials from the World Food Kitchen. What it is this. It's just this Gaza aid pier 2.0. What is being described to is as aid ghettos, right? As these concentration camps in the south of Gaza, where Palestinians need to move, walk for kilometers to go to these distribution sites that are being controlled by Egyptian and US mercenaries, that they are the ones handing out these meal kits that nobody knows who's paying for them, although I'm pretty sure it's the Gulf. Me personally, it's the Gulf that is giving this money through, some probably Israeli companies, because just before it opened its gates, the GHF, Haaretz had this report in which they talked to suppliers who were in the bidding process. The first thing they said was nobody can supply the amount of food that is needed in such short notice. Nobody can. It's too much. Second of all, they talk about the cost of it. So you're talking about $500 million. That this bidding process, whoever wins this is going to be looking at a pretty good a day at the bank, right? Like it's a lot of money. So regardless of anything, the CEO quits on Sunday, says, I cannot be part of this because it doesn't respect any humanitarian principles. There's no way that this scheme can provide the aid that is needed in the way that is needed, right? Because humanitarian aid you cannot pick and choose who you give food to in a war zone. Right. You cannot pick and choose where you give food. The UN has hundreds of sites across Gaza through, and of course that using all of the entry points to Gaza, the ground entry points, they could get the thousands of trucks that have been sitting outside of Gaza for months with food rotting in warehouses from the WFP, because Israel simply does not want to lift its blockade, because the Israeli project calls for the mass starvation of the Palestinian population. This is not a glitch in the system. It is feature. It is main feature. So this is also where the GHF comes in. On the one hand, it allows to pursue the forced displacement of Palestinians, right? Move them all to this tiny area in the south where they will get, allegedly this humanitarian aid from these mercenaries under the control of the Israeli army. Over the past week, every time that you've seen Palestinians go to get aid, you hear the reports that many are being killed, they're being shot to death. The Israelis are just opening fire on the crowds. If they're not opening fire on them, they are kidnapping them, they are taking them. This is a scheme to, to trap anybody they consider to be a Hamas fighter, right? So again, where is the humanitarian principle in any of these? And in the first couple of days of operations, they had to shut down because the Israelis started opening fire on the Palestinians, creating chaos. But this is not how it's portrayed in the media, right? It's portrayed as at most as a controversial, system that is seeking to help the starving Palestinians. But who's starving the Palestinians, right? Why don't they have any food? What's happening, right? Why don't you talk about that? And why don't you say that the GHF, it's simply a continuation of the Gaza aid pier, the military pier in Gaza that Joe Biden established to help Israel maintain control of the humanitarian aid that flows into Gaza in order to use starvation as a weapon of war.
Yeah, Jethro, he's pointing out that they tossed a stun grenade in the middle of a crowd of starving people, which is, again, if you allow hateful, racist, fascists, it's like, how did the Nazis see the Jews, right?
I mean, the images are exactly the same. The images from the GHF, what do you call them, pens, they're the same as the ones you saw in Poland. They're exactly the same. The only difference is they're in color.
Yeah, and the world is aware of it. That's the only difference. I mean, when the Soviets released the first concentration camp, the world was aghast by, oh my God, I can't believe this is what the Germans have been doing. Okay, but we've been watching this day in and day out on social media for years. And this notion of never again wasn't supposed to apply just to Jews. It was supposed to apply to just humanity in general. That's why they had the Nuremberg trials. And that's why it wasn't just the Jews during the Nuremberg trials. It was the world during the Nuremberg trials saying, we are never going to let this happen again. But you get a group of people who the world apparently finds to be disposable. And by the world, specifically, we're talking about Europe. And there's a patch of land that they want. And so Europe turns a blind eye. They pretend to distance themselves for the last 30 seconds. And the US effectively funds the genocide. And the next step of that is, okay, we have an administration that is now on board for the full takeover of Gaza. How do we do it? oh, I know, let's starve the population, to force the population into concentration camps. And then we can use their own infirmities, basically their own physical needs, as a way of trying to either kill, exterminate, or get them out of that area so Israel can take everything. It is grotesque. I mean, it really is. And this
Exactly.
boondoggle
Just
of a program. I mean,
you
please.
you remind me of something that you know Daniela Weiss, right? The settler leader, this lunatic in the West Bank, that said a few weeks ago, that if we don't give them food, they'll leave. Right? Like that's the mentality. If we don't give them food, if we starve them, they're gonna leave. If we blow up their houses, they're gonna leave. That's the
Right.
plan, right? This is the plan. It's not the like I said, it's not a glitch. It's actually what's
Right.
meant to do.
And see, that's the most frustrating thing about media, the US media and Europe in general, because they would say, well, we don't understand why Netanyahu doesn't end the war. It's like, what do you mean you don't understand why he doesn't end the war? It's obvious. Like, if you are blowing up hospitals and you're blowing up schools and you're setting kids on fire and you're blowing up UN buildings and you're shooting at UN, meaning
For
you
a
are
year and a
destroying
half. For a
for
year
a
and
year
a
and a
half.
half. You're doing it so people can't come back. That's the entire point. And they're acting like it's such a weird thing that they just keep the war going. Witkoff said that nonsense. He was like, yeah, Netanyahu doesn't have any clear objectives, but the war keeps going on. He has clear objectives. He
It's
tells
very
you what his
clear.
objectives are.
And actually, to go into what you said at the beginning, which is the terms of the ceasefire, right, that was proposed to Hamas.
Yep.
What it was, it's essentially, it doesn't call for an end to the war. It doesn't call for the withdrawal of U.S. troops. It maintains Israeli control over the aid mechanism. So what exactly is being proposed here, right? Why? Okay, you give the captives, right? You give back the captives that are alive. But then the other side, you don't get anything. You don't get anything. You don't even get respite for your people who have been, ethnically cleansed for 19 months. This is not a ceasefire proposal. This is simply, lay down and die. This is just like, being very transparent. We want the captives back, but then we're going to come back and kill you, because that is the terms that the Israeli leadership stands by. And remember that a poll by Penn University just 1 week ago shows 82% of the Israeli population agrees with the depopulation of Gaza. They support it, 82%. So this is not an issue of the government. This is an issue of Israeli society.
Yeah, they keep trying to make this like this is purely about Netanyahu. This is not purely about Netanyahu. He is perfectly in alignment with what his government wants, with the exception of the hostages, which Hamas is, God, man, they are in a tough spot. Because if you accept the deal, you're accepting the deal, and I want to get your take on this. You're accepting the deal knowing that Israel's going to rearm, reload, and fill their ranks with their military, because 40% of reservists hadn't been showing up. Mm-hmm. And in a month or two, go back on a killing spree. That's assuming you even wait a month or two.
Exactly.
Does anybody believe that if in 2 weeks after getting the hostages, and Netanyahu goes on a killing spree again, that Trump is going to say anything about it? He's going to blame Hamas. I guarantee you.
Of course. The victim is always here to blame, right? The genocided, the people who are being genocided are the ones to blame for existing, I guess, right? Like this is the rhetoric. Even when you talk about Western media or certain politicians being like, I don't understand why this keeps happening.
I don't get it.
You understand. You simply don't want to make peace with it, right? Like today you have Macron talking about because we're just a couple of weeks from this big summit at the UN in which it's expected that many nations are going to formally recognize a Palestinian state with French and Saudi sponsorship. That's so Macron talks about, I saw this quote: "If we abandon Gaza, we will lose all credibility."
You've already lost all credibility.
Emmanuel, you have no credibility anymore for a while now. So let's stop pretending, And but in any case, right? If just to mention quickly, this summit that is coming, right? Even if the world votes to recognize a Palestinian state, nothing's going to happen if there's no repercussions for Israel, if there's no consequences, right? You mentioned the Nuremberg trials. There need to be they need to be redone. There needs to be accountability for what's happening, and it's not just Benjamin Netanyahu. is the entirety of the Israeli defense system, of the intelligence. It's the soldiers, it's the commanders. You just need to go, like, I would suggest to your audience, go on Telegram or go on X and search for the Hind Raja Foundation. Search for the Israel Genocide Tracker channels. And here you will find just, an infinite number of evidence, of proof of what these soldiers are doing inside Gaza. And this has to be used for prosecutions down the line. International law needs to be upheld at some point, because if we don't, then what's happening in Gaza is simply not going to stay in Gaza. The level of brutality, of disregard for human life, is not going to stay there. It's going to start to be exported elsewhere. And we already know that, in particular in the United States, you have a government that is more than willing to start rounding up people on the streets and sending them to a third country, to work slave labor in concentration camps. You have a government that is talking about sending migrants and Palestinians, mind you, to Libya, a country that has been destroyed and where open-air slave markets abound. To Rwanda, a country that is also in crisis, that has also had its own genocide, right? So what exactly is happening? Ethnic cleansing is all of a sudden going to be globalized. And we're just going to be sitting on our hands, looking at Emmanuel Macron, wondering whether he has any credibility left.
Well, he's getting beat by his wife, so credibility has been lost a long time ago. Look, man, I agree with you. Everything that you said. Esteban, fantastic breakdown. When I saw that shadowy organization, my thought was like, okay, this is outrageous. The notion that they're trying to make a profit off of starvation.
Exactly.
Exactly,
because remember that they get tax rebates. Anybody who's donating to these, GHF, they can write it off as tax. Exactly. So this is not about humanitarian aid. It's about money. This is about money and land. Esteban
Carrillo, he's an Ecuadorian, for some reason, he's a Beirut-based Ecuadorian journalist, but whatever. Ecuadorian journalist, currently writing for The Cradle. The Cradle is a fantastic media organization. They are on, I often see their work on Twitter, but they also have a YouTube program now that is running, what is it, Monday and Thursday?
Monday and Thursdays. We have our podcast called The Cradle News Roundup. Everybody go check it out.
Definitely check them out. Their stories are pulse on the news constantly over the course of the day. Man, you guys are fantastic. Great job. Great work. He was previously with Tell Us Our English, another good organization. Esteban, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jamal. Have a good one.
You have a good one. Be safe.
Bye-bye.
All right. And I am going to my last guest for the day, and definitely not the least, one of my favorite people to talk to, Professor Richard Wolff. Professor Richard Wolff is professor of economic emeritus, University of Massachusetts Amherst, and visiting professor of the graduate program in international affairs of the New School University in New York City. He's founder of Democracy at Work and host of their nationally syndicated show, Economic Update. By the way, that is a fantastic show. I've watched that show for years, and you have often been on the pulse of what has been taking place and making, let's say, what has been taking place in a larger global world understandable, given a workable context to understand it in a way that media just kind of drops the ball. His latest book, The System is the Sickness When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, is available with other books such as Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism at democracyatwork.info. Professor, welcome to the show. You doing okay this morning?
I'm doing all right, Jamal, and I'm very glad to be talking with you.
Well, thank you. There is something that I have been fascinated by that has been taking place over the last, I guess, few weeks. I'll go a few weeks since Donald Trump has been in office. So Trump enacts his sanction, or let's say tariff war. This turns out to be illegal, so the courts puts a knife in him, but then they reinstate the tariffs because he went back begging to the appeals court, appellate court. But over the course of the time frame that he's been doing this, he's been attacking Jerome Powell. And he's been saying, oh, Jerome Powell is not cutting interest rates. I think Jerome Powell is doing this country a disservice. How dare Jerome Powell not cut interest rates? Even going so far as to say, I would fire Jerome Powell, and he'll leave if I tell him to leave. And then when the bond markets flip out, he's like, what do you mean fire Jerome Powell? I never said anything about fire Jerome Powell. he apparently brought Powell to the White House for his first face-to-face meeting. And of course, normal Trump. Yeah, it's a travesty that you don't lower interest rates. Why is he attacking Powell so fervently on this issue of lowering interest rates when he is the one who is creating all sorts of havoc in the market?
Good. I'm glad you asked. And for once, it's easy to answer the question. Everything that Mr. Trump is doing is endangering the economic situation for most people in the United States. And let me go through very quickly. If you put a tariff on everything, a tariff is a tax. It's just a name of a particular kind of tax. And it is most like a sales tax. You know, if you go into the store and you buy a shirt, they'll tell you, okay, the shirt costs $15, and here's the sales tax on top of that. And if you add the sales tax, you're going to be out $17.11 to get that $15 shirt. So for you, for all practical purposes, it's a $17 shirt, not a $15 shirt. So if Mr. Trump imposes a tariff, which is a tax on everything that comes into the United States from the rest of the world, he's simply adding a sales tax, which he wouldn't dare do because the American people are in economic difficulties where this is the last thing on earth they would want or would support. But by calling it a tariff, he fools half the population because they don't know what that is. No one has ever taught it to them. It's not their fault. It's not part of the curriculum in our school to teach this sort of stuff. My students in the university don't know what it means. I have to explain it to them. But that's what it is. It's a tax. And for a population that is already straining, more than half the American people cannot come up with $400 for an emergency. They just don't have it. The only way they can get that money is by really cutting back on the food or the health care they get, you know, basics of a decent life. So he can't do what he wants to do by honestly calling it a tax. He calls it a tariff, and it's hurting the population. It's going to drive our economy down because when the tariff raises the price of everything, and let's remember, we as a country are more dependent on stuff coming in from the outside than at any other time since we were a colony of Great Britain, 100 years, 200, 300 years ago. So, I give an example. You got up this morning. You probably had a cup of coffee. Coffee comes from outside the United States, right? And maybe, like me, you put sugar in your coffee. Well, the sugar comes in from outside. We don't produce the sugar that we consume. And the cup probably was made in China, and the silverware was made out of Bangladesh. Before you're done, you can't turn around. This is going to hurt your pocketbook. And we are, as a people, going to buy less stuff because the money we have, right, it's not going up by 10%. If we got an increase in our wages by 10%, we could pay a 10% increase in our prices, and we wouldn't be better off, but we wouldn't be worse off. But 99% of us aren't getting 10% increase this year. That's not happening nowhere. So in fact, it is going to reduce what the people can buy, and that means other people are going to lose their jobs because less goods are being purchased. So long story short, the tariff wars threaten us with two things we don't want: a cutback in jobs and work because people can't afford, and an inflation, or rising prices. And when you have those two things together, economics has a word: stagflation. The combination of stagnation, no job growth, in fact, you losing jobs, and rising prices. And as if that weren't enough, we have the crazy Elon Musk firing hundreds of thousands of public employees, make the whole situation worse. Okay, so that's the setting. What does Mr. Trump need? He needs some offset. He needs something to happen that will not allow what I just said to play out. Here comes Mr. Powell. If he can drop the interest rates, bring them way down, it'll make it cheaper for companies to borrow and for individuals. If you drop the interest rates, for example, the credit card company, if you have one, will lower the amount of interest they charge on your outstanding balance. All right. If you need to buy a car, the monthly payment for that car will be lower if the interest rates are reduced. Right. Your landlord will have less pressure to squeeze you on the rent if the interest he has to pay is lower. So Mr. Trump wants to come in there and get this head of the Federal Reserve to help him in his political pickle that he brought on himself. That's what he wants. And Mr. Powell stands there. You know, he's a Republican. Mr. Powell is a conservative. He's more like Trump than he is different from him. But Mr. Powell has to say to Mr. Trump, here's a problem, Jack. If I lower the interest rates, the whole world, which is hesitant in a way it never has been for almost a century now, the rest of the world lends huge amounts of money, trillions of dollars into the United States. Americans do not understand that our standard of living, and this has been true for 30 years, depends on a vast flow of lended money from the rich people of the world, from other governments in the world, into the United States. But it comes in part because of the interest they can earn when they lend that money. And if the government lowers the interest rate, they're not going to lend it to us. And if you think we're in trouble now, I got news for you. If that loan money coming into the United States were to stop, we're talking about a level of economic trouble that makes what we're in now look like nothing. So Mr. Powell has to say to Mr. Trump, I can't lower the interest rates. It's too dangerous. Mr. Trump doesn't care if he's shown us anything. He could give a flying you-know-what. He's taking care of himself and his policy and how he looks. That's his job. And if that causes a longer-term problem for America, he's not going to be with us longer term, right? He's got only 3.5 years left of this, and is now looking good for him now. So that's why he needs Mr. Powell to do something that Mr. Powell knows he cannot do.
But that also creates a problem when the debt comes due for the U.S. also, right? Because we have to pay. And speaking of that, two things I want to add to what you said to that: depreciation of the dollar and Trump's big, beautiful bill, as he calls it. Effectively, the fat, ugly, attack the poor bill, as I like to dub it. The depreciation of the dollar. So I am sitting in Malaysia right now. I was in Albania for 2 months. And what I noticed was, over the course of the time frame that I've been away, what I can buy gets less and less and less. Meaning my purchasing power with the dollar versus, let's say, the euro, they use the lek, versus the lek, or for that matter, versus the RM, is weaker. And you could see it. Like when I had to pay for stuff in euros, you could see it over the course of just like a month or two, that you're paying out more. What started off as one amount ended up being like 120, 125, et cetera. That is also damaging. Yes. Why is that taking place? Is that taking place as a direct result of and I get, for the audience, this is how the sausage is made, but I am curious about this on my own self. Why is that happening? Why is the depreciation of the currency taking place? And is he depreciating the currency on purpose?
Okay, first, let me tell you what happened to the dollar so you know, because you're not going to get that from Mr. Trump, because it's not the kind of news he wants people to have. And that's the only truth of it. The dollar has depreciated, depending exactly on how you count, between 8 and 10% from the day of his inauguration. And there is no way anyone could excuse him from being part of the reason why that's happening. The most prevalent explanation that I've seen in the financial press goes like this. Once upon a time, the United States was conceived, and this has been true for at least the last 75 years, ever since World War II.
Mhm.
The United States was conceived as the safest place to hold your wealth. In other words, if you're a millionaire in Malaysia, or you're a rich company in Africa or Asia, Latin America, it doesn't matter, or Europe. If you have wealth, you don't want to have all your wealth in one particular place, whatever country you happen to be in, because things could change and your money could disappear. So
Yeah.
you take a portion of it and you put, not all of it, but a portion of it, and you put it where it is safest to be held. And that, until now, was the United States, at least for the last 75 years. Before that, it was England. It was, you put your money in London. Now you put your money in the United States. And here's how it's done. You set up a bank account in New York and you put money in there. Is that legal? Yes. Can you do that? Yes. Are there people around the world who do that? Loads of them. Companies do it, businesses do it, individuals do it. Here's the second thing. You buy an apartment on Fifth Avenue. You spend $3 million, you get a lovely apartment. Are you in the apartment? No. You're not doing it because you're going to live in that apartment. So 3 times a year, your niece and nephew are given a ticket to New York where they go and they do shopping all day long, living in the apartment on Fifth Avenue, having a wonderful time, and then they go back to where their normal lives are.
Yeah.
You're doing that because that's a way of holding wealth. The value of that apartment over time will grow along with other real estate. So, or you buy land in San Diego, or you buy resort property somewhere, or you invest in the stock market here in the United States. These are all ways of holding wealth. But for people to do that, they have to buy dollars, because you can't buy the land in San Diego with other currency. You have to pay with a dollar. And the stock market requires you to pay for the shares you buy with dollars. So there's what we call a demand for dollars, and that makes the dollar valuable. Now, suppose you have a president who looks like he's unhinged, right? Who's acting in ways that you've not seen before, who talks in a way that's different, who says one thing one day, the opposite the next day, and on the third day denies he said either of the things of the last 2 days. So we don't know what the tariffs are right now. We don't have any idea what the actual tariffs are across the board. Right. And I'm not even talking about the retaliatory tariffs that are coming once the countries around the world know what the United States is doing to them with tariffs. They're going to do their version to us. No one knows what to do. No one knows how to plan. No one knows where to invest, because you can't figure out what's profitable and what isn't. And so, long story short, the people around the world are saying, if you have wealth in America, this is the time to reduce that wealth. You don't dump it all, but you don't put all your eggs in the proverbial same basket. And when the United States stops being the safe, the secure place it once was, that's a signal to every business, to every person wealthy enough to have wealth, to say it's time to reduce. Here's how they say it on Wall Street: reduce your exposure to the United States. Right? That's what's going on. People are dumping. They're taking, for example, that apartment on Fifth Avenue. They're calling the realtor and they're saying, sell it. And as soon as they get the $3 million that the apartment is worth, they cash that $3 million in for euros or for Japanese yen or for Chinese yuan, because it's more safe now to have that wealth in a diverse collection of. Look, if you want the condensed version, this is all part of the decline of the American empire that we are living through. And you'll never hear that from Mr. Trump because he doesn't want that associated with him.
Yeah.
But to be fair, you won't hear it from Mr. Biden, and you didn't hear it from Kamala Harris either. It's a taboo in America. We don't discuss it, but that's in the end. That's what's going on. The whole rest of the world is watching that the absolutely dominant country of the last 75 years isn't dominant anymore, and it is not coming back.
You get half of the country that believes we're going to go into a recession. You get the other half that believe we're going to have a booming economy. I have no idea how that split stayed in place, but that was one of the most recent polls. I think it was like 46, 47.
Yeah, no, you're right. And look, here's what people should understand. It's a testimony to the power of hype, to the power of the media, mainstream, not mainstream. It's what they call in Washington talking up. You talk up whatever it is you want people to believe. In my opinion, and I'm born in America, I've lived and worked here all my life. I call it advertising culture. Think about it. What does an advertiser do? If I make, I don't know, breakfast cereal, I'm now going to put a poster up on the, advertising poster up on a road that people have to drive by, and so their eyes glance up at the billboard. What is the billboard going to say? It's going to show you a picture of a happy child digging into a bowl of that cereal. It's going to tell you it's nutritious, it's got vitamin. It's going to tell you every good thing it can think of. Real good qualities, and then they'll make up a bunch too. It's got this cereal has got A649. Doesn't mean anything, but it makes you wonder, oh goodness, I need A649 so I'm healthy. And what do? They never say a word about what's bad about it. Right. They don't tell you that 1 out of 10 people get diarrhea if they eat this cereal. Oh no, they'll never tell you anything like that. So advertising is fundamentally dishonest. It is a way of talking in which you hype whatever you think is positive and you hide whatever is negative. And our politicians have learned this skill. So they tell you everything they think will help make them look good, and they hide everything. Look at I know you were just talking about Emmanuel Macron. So his wife punches him in the face, and it doesn't look good. So he has to send out his people to make this go away. And so he and the people around him start telling one lie after another in order to make it look like she was getting ready to give him a big kiss rather than what she obviously was doing, right? And we're all supposed to be stupid enough to fall for it. The example I once used with my classroom, my students loved, is that ad for soap. So there's this lovely person, soaping themselves, getting clean in the shower. And along it comes and says, not only will this soap get you clean, but it will revolutionize your sex life. And everybody does what you do, Jamal. Everybody giggles because we all know what BS this is. We know that the whole point of it is to get money out of our wallet to buy that soap.
Professor, what's the name of that soap, by the way? I'm not saying I need it. Just curious. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's advertising. It's childish. It makes us all stupid. It assumes we're all stupid. It floods us with information we know has been paid for to get us to buy whatever it is being advertised.
Yeah.
And so in a large part, we discount it, which we should. But it means we don't really know very well what the difference is between fake and real.
Right.
It's
It
easy for
destroys
Mr.
credibility.
Trump, right? The fake news, fake news. People are so used to fake that they can be easily persuaded. This is fake. That is fake. And we're lost. We're lost as a people because we've given up on the belief that it's important when you're talking to someone to be honest, to say honestly, this is what I see that is positive, and this is what I see that is negative, because all things have both of that in them, and you're not being honest if you pretend otherwise.
Are they doing this on purpose? There's an idea that they're trying to depreciate the dollar intentionally.
Yes, part of them are. I mean, every business in America is now terrified. And if I can get this across, we will have done a good job today, Jamal. Every business that sells abroad is terrified. And most American businesses, directly or indirectly, now depend in part on markets outside the United States. Why are they all terrified? They're terrified because the rest of the world is angry at the tariffs that Mr. Trump is imposing because it hurts them. They can't. Remember my example of the $15 shirt that ends up costing $17 because of the tariff. Well, if you're a foreign company and their tariffs are going up, you're going to sell fewer shirts in the United States because Americans can't pay that higher price. That happens everywhere. So they feel hurt. The government they didn't elect, Mr. Trump, has just done something that hurts them. And you know what they do? They go to their government, just as Americans would, and they say, they're hurting us. You need to do the same to them to offset the hurt. In other words, if I'm a shirt maker in, I'll pick a country, Italy, I want a tariff because that way the Americans will have less sales in Italy because you got to pay a tariff to bring the American shirt in. And what I lose in America, I can make up by selling more shirts here in Italy. So they're going to retaliate. But for American companies, this is terrible. They don't want that any more than the Italian company wants the tariffs here. So what are they going to do? They go to Mr. Trump. They did that and appealed to him. Don't do this. That didn't work. He needs it for his political project. So he told them, get lost. I'm not listening to you. All right. Now they have a second chance. Drop the value of the dollar, because that means a foreigner with an Italian, for example, who uses euros, because that's the currency that Italy uses. If you drop the value of the dollar, they'll get more dollars for their euro, and that will drop the cost to them of anything they want to do in dollars. That will offset, cancel out some or all of the tariff. So the deal they want, and they went to Mr. Trump, is, okay, we'll stop beating up on you for this stupid tariff that you're imposing if you get the interest rates down, because then the dollar will depreciate and will be offsetting. So he's under pressure, and Mr. Trump has to worry that he says to them, I'm not going to worry about the interest rates. I'm not going to worry about the dollar. I'm not going to worry about the business. Then they're going to say, okay, we're not going to worry about you, and you're going to be president another 10 minutes.
I see.
Think about it. If the business community of America turns against Mr. Trump, he's toast. He's done. He won't get anything through the United States Congress. He'll be lucky if he survives, the rest of his term. He has to have the business community supporting him. That's why you had the big, beautiful tax bill, because that's an enormous bribe of the government, of the business community, to suck up the tariffs, which are not good for them, to suck up the devalued dollar, because he's made it worth their while by saying, look, here's an enormous gift to you. I'll continue the tax cuts I gave you in 2017, and I'll give you a whole bunch extra new ones on top of it.
One last question before I let you go, and it's on the big, beautiful tax bill. They are putting $20 trillion on an already $36 trillion debt. Now, if they're cutting our AAA rating, I believe it was Moody's, I think that was the last AAA rating. If they're cutting that because their argument is, okay, you guys are A, unsustainable.
Right.
B, you seem to have no capacity to raise revenue. You're spending $2 trillion a year, and your president is completely unhinged.
Right.
And now you're putting $20 trillion more on the debt. How is that a bribe? Like, it seems like it makes the situation worse, not better. And do you see a point where that becomes a breaking point? Like, the notion of U.S. being $100 trillion in debt seems to be outlandish, but it seems that that's the path that we're effectively on. At what point does it actually, where people are like, you know what, we're done. We're not buying your debt anymore.
Jamal, you're 100% correct. And everybody knows this. Everybody who pays attention understands you cannot continue to expand a debt as fast as this country is doing it when your ability to pay that is not rising anywhere near as big as the debt.
Right.
And it is in that way like a person who is in love with their credit card and can't get through their head that if you keep giving one merchant after another your credit card and you keep building up your balance, you're not going to be able to pay, and then very bad things happen to you. You have to declare bankruptcy. You're not entitled to get another card for several years. All the things that happen when that everybody knows it, but we don't have a political system that can handle that understanding. Why? Because most politicians are in there for a short time. Mr. Trump has to do what he has to do to make himself whatever it is he wants to make in the remaining 3.5 years, unless Steve Bannon can get him a third term, which is not likely. Okay?
Yeah.
So he knows his time is limited. He knew his time was limited the first time he was president. Most of the things he said he was going to do then, he didn't do. Most of the things that needed to be done then, like, for example, reining in the deficits, he didn't do that.
Right.
We don't have a wall between us and Mexico. And we sure as hell don't have a wall paid for by Mexico. He promised that would happen. Blah, blah. And you know what he did? Every politician understands that. You do what makes you look good now. Then you go to the next higher. You stop being a congressperson, you'll be a senator, and then you'll be a vice president. The damage you do is for the people who come later. It's their problem. You've graduated to the next stage. That's a political system destined for collapse because it disconnects the politician from the responsibility of what the politician does. So we don't have anybody in a position to do it. By the way, if you talk to the few senators, and there are not many, who understand this stuff, they're not going to disagree with you. They know what you just said is true. They know that these are unsustainable debts. But Mr. Schumer, for example, who represents the New York financial community, the senator from New York, he pushes spending money because that's the Democratic Party way of getting voters.
Yeah.
And the Republicans hold back while giving tax cuts to the rich and the business. They both do stuff that's good for them and that worsens the deficit. And they all complain about the deficit. And this stupid charade is what we call American politics. It's a disaster. And you're right. Eventually, and by the way, eventually it's getting closer. That's what the declining value of the dollar shows us. The rest of the world is not playing this stupid game. They're not going to get caught. If America gets in debt much more than it already is, you're going to see either from the right wing or from the left wing or from both. Here's a prediction I make to you. There are going to be political voices saying, we're not spending the money we need to keep our people healthy, to educate our children, to maintain our roads. And instead, we're taking our tax money and giving it to rich people in interest on the national debt, many of whom are not Americans. The largest holder of American debt of the government of the United States is the government of Japan.
Yep.
The second largest is the People's Republic of China. And
No,
Americans are
UK.
going,
I'm
or
sorry.
the UK by now.
And then China.
Americans are going to say, wait, I'm not voting for a politician who pays back the debt that shouldn't have been borrowed to a foreigner while my kid can't get food enough in the food stamp program. And American politicians are what are they going to say? I'm going to protect the interest. They're going to be voted out of office. And you know who's going to come in? The people who say, you rich people who lend to the government, you're going to wait after we take care of our people, their health, their education, their food stamps, you name it. After that, if there's something left, we'll give you some interest. But you're coming last online, not first. Oh, that thought occurs to people around the world. I can assure you, they don't want to be holding debt of the U.S. government when what I just described begins to happen. And let me assure you, it has happened in many, many other countries, transformed their politics. So the idea that that can't happen here is silly.
Professor Richard Wolff, fantastic breakdown. A bit like that, fantastic breakdown. I have a bright audience.
Look, I'm an optimistic person. I think things are going to get better, but that's because I count on the mass of people to have a deeper kind of wisdom and to recognize that this system is not working anymore. And I know it's difficult to face that. I know I wish it weren't the case, but it is. And in the end, like any doctor will tell you, you're better off facing what the problem is than pretending that it isn't there.
I just don't know when that is. If we're going to be $56 trillion in debt. Trump will get his big, beautiful bill. I don't believe for a moment that they're going to stop him from doing it. He is going to make aggressive cuts to healthcare. I mean, they're taking like $1 trillion nearly out of Medicaid. Yeah. Elon Musk, as you pointed out, the world's richest man, has been going after middle class people who basically are at the other end of the economic spectrum. And so it's like,
Jamal, if I allow me to interrupt you,
please.
You're absolutely right. But that picture of Elon Musk prancing around a stage, holding that chainsaw, that's going to come back and haunt that man for the rest of his life. That image of the world's richest man chopping down average middle-class Americans with government jobs, that's a mistake on a scale that's, right up there with Napoleon thinking he could take over all of Europe. Napoleon ended up in jail. Mr. Elon Musk will be lucky if he gets that outcome.
Professor Richard Wolff, he is Professor of Economic Emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and visiting professor at the graduate program at International Affairs and New School University, New York City. And by the way, I should ask you, is this still correct? I want to make sure that your bias is correct. There's been a few people who's like, dude, that is a year ago, that is 2 years ago, that is 3 years ago.
Well, the latest book I did is called Understanding Capitalism. And that's available at democracyatwork.info.
Okay, Understanding Capitalism. Okay, but everything else is still good. All right. And as you point out, he's founder of Democracy at Work, host of the nationally syndicated show, Economic Update. Again, a fantastic show if you like what you just heard and you're trying to get this kind of sense, this behind the scenes understanding of what's going on, that is the show for you. His latest book is Capitalism, Understanding Capitalism. There's that one. And you can get it at democracyatwork.info.
Right.
And what can people find you? I know they can find you at Democracy at Work. They can find you on Twitter at Professor Wolff. Is there anywhere else that you either put out articles or anything?
Yeah, Democracy at Work, both YouTube and Substack. You'll find all of our stuff there.
Excellent. Professor, thank you for this. You have
My
a
pleasure,
fantastic day.
Jamal, and thank you for having the kind of program that talks about these issues. It's really a national service.
Oh, I'm fascinated by this stuff. So I thank you for being willing to come on and discuss it. You be
My
safe.
pleasure.
All right. Love that man. He is awesome. I often gush and say he's affected my workable point of view. I mean that when I say that. Because there's some people, Jack Fresco will be one, who you hear them and you're like, that guy's right. It's like it just soaks in you where you're like, that guy's right. That guy's onto something. And it leads you down not just data, but how you look at data, if that makes sense. Like how you look, like, when I talk about how journalists, when they're looking at, let's say, the Iran thing, the Israel thing, and they would be like, it's very weird that Israel keeps going in this direction because it doesn't seem like there are any other objectives and that they need to make a deal. And I would point out your lens is a bit askew. There's something wrong with your lens. You wash your lens, get that thing surgically altered, because it is obvious that they are not trying to get a deal. They're trying to destroy everything with the idea of getting those people kicked out of the country. They've said as much. It's kind of that. When you're looking at an economic system and you're realizing this doesn't work, and that just doesn't work, it creates bad outcomes. Like, it's one thing if you have a revolutionary verve in a political space, and in that revolutionary verve, you say, this is what we're going to do. And you have a bunch of true believers who are there with you. And so you acknowledge capitalism has bad outcomes if you let it. And so we need to be super vigilant hawks in ensuring those bad outcomes don't take place. Let's say like FDR and the New Deal, those type of things. It's another thing when those people die and the people who come behind realize, hey, we can get rich. Hey, I can get elected by helping other people get rich. And that revolutionary verve goes away to a very specific ideology. That ideology is not democracy. That ideology is capitalistic capitalism. Because even though people act as if we have this system, this economic and political system that are somehow intermeshed with each other, one eats the other. And it's not the democracy that eats the capitalism. One eats the other. It's not that it eats it overnight. It eats it. It whittles away, almost like the Russians eating away at the Ukrainians in a war of attrition that attrits it year after year after year. And tell me I'm wrong. And the reason why I said tell me I'm wrong, what do you have in regards to healthcare? What do you have in regards to education? What do you have when you have a president of the United States that is eating nearly $1 trillion out of Medicaid, a program that is already undervalued, meaning underfilled in regards to the amount of money and revenue that it gets? You're taking nearly $1 trillion out of it in order to put $20 trillion on the debt. So you are putting $20 trillion on the public's dime in order to give millionaires and billionaires extra money. You don't have roads, you don't have education, you don't have any of those things. When you look at other countries around the world, they have those things, even though they themselves are also being whittled and eaten away. Your country is spending $1 trillion on the military. Donald Trump is talking about putting a golden dome in space, a nonsense boondoggle. That's all it is, a boondoggle. The notion that Trump is going to put through and dump all of this money, hundreds of billions of dollars, into something that most likely won't work, won't get finished, and will provoke an arms race. Okay, why is he doing it? He's not doing it for America. He's doing it for the business interests that are around him that say, hey, we need ways of throwing away money. And here's a way to throw away money. We'll just make a golden dome that creates an arms race in space. So all of these other countries now have to spend a bunch of money on this stuff too. You think that's for your interests? It's not. What will be for your interests would be, let's stop these wars, let's make peace, and let's reinvest that money at home. That will be for public interests. That is not what they do. That is not what they do. There's a difference in those things. I hope you get my point. Whereas maybe 100, 200 years ago, you might have gotten that focus of true believers. I'm not even entirely sure that was true then, considering the robber barons and all of these other people. Truth of the matter is FDR was a fluke. He wasn't the norm. FDR came in after a war where there was like a war dividend, and you had a Soviet Union that the United States and Europe were freaked out about because the Soviet Union was running with this idea of we're workers' paradise. We believe in workers' revolutions. We're going to change the world into this communist system. And so you had a capitalistic system that had to actually play nice because it had to look as if the standard of living in the United States, or for that matter, the standard of living in Europe, was somehow getting better over time. So you can say, hey, look at our big, beautiful stores. Look at the wages of these workers. Look at the freedoms and the liberties that all of these people have. And look at that repressive Soviet government. Okay, well, what happens when the Soviet Union collapses? We no longer need to pretend. Fukuyama, end of the world. Fukushima, no, Fukuyama's, yeah, end of the world. End of history, as they call it. Meaning, this is the only system. Now, even China, by the way, who calls themselves, what is it, socialism with Chinese characteristics, what did they do? They put a harness around the throat of capitalism as an animal, like it was a wild dog, and said, all right, boy, run. Do your thing, have at it. But we're holding on to the leash. And so, yes, we're going to build a ton of wealth. We're going to have factories. We're going to have businesses. We're going to have things like SpaceX that sends stuff into space. Hell, we're going to be mining asteroids. We're going to do all of that stuff. And we're going to have businesses and everything else that does those things. However, it will be under control by the people and the Chinese government. Full stop. And we will chop your head off if you fuck around with us as a business and you do stuff that goes outside of the bounds. Meaning, it's one thing if you had a government and a system that was looking out for public interest that used capitalism. It's another thing with that ideology of self-interest, of I'm going to get rich or die trying. I'm going to do, wealth is the only thing that matters, and it matters to the exclusion of everything else, values and otherwise. How do you run a functional government when that is your ideology? And when the people who you care about are the people who effectively do something for you directly. Meaning, this isn't about me being nice, isn't about me being kind, it's about what I can get out of it. So when I'm going into another country, I'll put in a military base, that's it. I'll put in troops, that's it. Because I can get something out of those troops being there, I can get my hands on resources, I can do all of that stuff. If I need to knock over a government in order to get my hands on Iranian oil, damn it, I'll do it. If you ask me for more oil revenue, looks like you're going to need some freedom. It's stuff like that. Like what does that look like at home when the only thing that compels behavior is leverage? And as a population to have any leverage in the context of the government, you need a large mass of human beings that are willing to have a sustained political push in order to get anything accomplished. And even then, when you get that political push, will you touch the system itself? What does it mean to touch the system itself? Is that a civil war? Do capitalists give up their reins and control of the means of production across the board in such a way that any substantive change that you make is not going to be rolled back in a couple of years when the next person who's willing to do business gets involved? I hope you get my point. At the end of the day, what it boils down to is the way the system operates. It's not any individual political actor. When there's a reason, and I'm going to end it on this because we've gone late. When there's a reason we don't entirely blame our oligarchs, because everything in the way that we operate tells them to do exactly what they do. Hey, I can ship this job overseas. I understand that Bob, Todd, Tyrone, Jerome, Yum Yum, Ray Ray are going to lose their jobs. I understand that they were making a relatively decent living working at the factory, making 15 an hour, whatever they were making. But I need a new yacht. I need a new house. That's what I need. I mean, fuck, man, I'm nearly poor. I only have $30 million in the bank. And because I'm nearly poor with only $30 million in the bank, I'm sorry, I need to fire all of you, and I need to ship your job abroad. And I'm going to pay ting ting, tung tung, bing bing, and yes, I'm being brutally racist right now. I'm not trying to on purpose. I'm just making a point. I'm going to give them money. And whereas they were getting $6 an hour, they're now going to get 7 or 8. They're going to thank me for the raise, and all of you are going to lose your jobs. And whereas you were getting a decent factory job, you're now going to work at Walmart, Pizza Hut, Domino's, Wawa's, Uber, Lyft, etc. That's what's going to happen. I'm going to get my second yacht. I'm going to get my second house. And even though I'm going to still feel poor, making $60 million a year, I'm a little less poor at $60 million until I feel, desperation getting me and I need another yacht, in which case I'm going to do something else. I hope you get my point. It wasn't about American workers. As I've told my mom on more than one occasion, it doesn't matter to them if you have a job. That's not their job. That's not their objective. It's not your boss's job to give you a job. It's his job to make as much money as possible. Your job just so happens to be a quirk in that process. If your job wasn't necessary, he wouldn't have the job for you. It just wouldn't be there. It's not about hiring you. It's not about hiring anybody else. In fact, if they could put in a robot to do it, they'd put in a robot to do it. It's not about giving you a job. They ship it overseas because they can make a huge amount of money. It's not about building the roads. It's not about high-speed rail. It's not about any of that stuff. It's about getting as much money as you could possibly get. It's about getting rich. So, how does the system function? Under that model, that becomes a prevailing ideology even more and over a democratic system. You'd have some capitalists who would say, you don't even need democracy, you just need capitalism. And they firmly believe it. Firmly believe it. All right, we have come to the end. I'm running my mouth. Sandra Hearn. Sandra Hearn becomes a YouTube member. Welcome to the family, Sandra. Welcome to the family. I used to be in this program called Upward Bound. And the guy who used to run Upward Bound was called, I can't remember his first name, but his last name was Hearns. Cool older guy. Cool guy, cool cat. That's what it reminds me of. But Sandra, welcome to the family, and thank you very much. Thank you very much. Alexander G. Trump didn't invent South African genocide. I've been following this disaster for 25 years. Nobody's saying what? Trump didn't invent South Africa genocide. I've been following this disaster for 25 years. I think you mean apartheid. Nobody thinks Trump created South Africa apartheid. Or do you mean white genocide? You mean white genocide? No, nobody thinks that Trump invented that. I would tell you, I've met 1 or 2 South Africans, and in their minds, apartheid was better than what it is now. And they would say, hey, man, look at the standard of living that us good Christian white folks were living in. And look at what South Africa looks like now. And it's like, yeah, but you realize you were keeping all of these people in bondage. And maybe if you weren't keeping them in bondage, there wouldn't be this hell of a transition period to go from point A to point B that you guys are dealing with now. Yeah, I know, but white people were fantastic back then. Okay, there's no white genocide. Black people are also being killed at South Africa and killed at a higher rate. If you want to say there's a black genocide, fair enough, but nobody ever says there's a black genocide. But you're right, Alexander G. People have been saying this shit for years, especially with the ANC coming to power, which is a bit rich, by the way, which is a bit rich. You have many of these Western governments that backed that apartheid regime that was in government. The US being, in particular, backing that apartheid regime that was in South Africa, just like it's backing Israel now. It's even backing Israel more fervently. It is a bit rich that a country that has had slaves, Jim Crow, redlining, that has had these policies, even the New Deal, blacks weren't included in the New Deal. Even a country that has assiduously worked to marginalize and have its own apartheid system in the United States, including lynchings. I'm about to say lynchings and hangings, those things are the same thing. Racist, fascist elements in this country. the Klan, which had political connections. It's not shocking that a government like that would back an apartheid state in South Africa. There's a kinship, just like there's a kinship with Israel. If we had a video camera back during the time when Native Americans were in the United States, what would it look like? It would look like Israel. You would find fascists. They would be hateful. They would want to take the land. They would not necessarily care about the ethics of taking the land or the morality of stealing and taking the land. They would murder the people who are on that land. You would find people with, low morals who would murder, kill, steal, or for that matter, try to expel and ethnically cleanse a particular area. They would create laws that would criminalize the people on the land to give it a patina of legitimacy when you're writing laws effectively saying it's okay to kill these people. You would mythologize it in your history. So Columbus sits down with a Native American, and the Native American say, hey, here's some corn. And Columbus says, hey, thank you very much. Here's some turkey. And we're going to eat turkey and corn together. And everything was fantastic. And we lived in harmony ever since. Us here and them in their reservations. That's what you do, right? The only difference is with video cameras, your social media. We're living in a modern era where what happens on the globe is not secret to everybody else that's on the globe. That is the one key benefit of social media. It webs the world together in a way that was never done prior. We're still resolving the fact that it weaves the world together in a way that we've never seen before. I'm trying to point to, though, that we have a kinship with these countries that had these fascistic, maniacal sociopaths, elements in that society. You preside over vicious, disgusting, deranged treatment of the majority of a country. And you have to be that way. Otherwise, the majority is going to overwhelm you in the voting system, right? Same issue with Israel. And then you steal the land, you steal the resources, you take it all for the most part. Blacks may get, 5%, if they get that much. And your regime falls apart. And the government that gets into play, the ANC, comes in with a revolutionary verve saying, we need to balance this equation. And despite the fact that you stole all of it for all of those years, when they said we need to balance the equation, something that has public will and political will, white population scream, oh my God, they're killing white farmers. Oh my God, they're taking our property. I hate to tell you the order of events, but you stole their property first. I hate to tell you the order of events. Get your shit right. Wanda USA super sticker. Thank you, Wanda. I love that sticker, by the way. Thank you, Wanda. And Blex, new member. Welcome to the family, Blex. Blex became a YouTube member. Shout out to you, Blex, for becoming a YouTube member. I feel like I missed somebody. I did miss somebody. Right here. Aries for Fries, they finally passed the law where you can talk bad about Israel according to Marco Rubio. Did they? Did they? Where you can or you can't? Or you can't? Well, good luck with policing that. And good luck with that shit not being struck down by the Supreme Court. Because I have a hard time believing that even a conservative Supreme Court is going to let that fly. Courts don't even let fly this idea of kicking foreigners out of the country for talking about Israel. There is nothing more anti-American. This has been maybe one of the most anti-American administrations in the history of this country, and not for the reasons that liberals think. It has everything to do with this idea that you are taking actions. Look, whatever is in your immediate political interests should be separate and distinct from what is in America's interests. And part of the oath of office and the reason you take that oath, and again, I don't think anybody cares about that oath, because again, get rich, not trying. Same, 50 Cent hit it on the head. That's not just 50 Cent living in the streets. That's also politicians and the way that they operate. Just because they wear a suit doesn't mean they're any better. The oath is there to try to make you consciously aware of the fact that your responsibilities, everything matters less than your oath of office. That I'm taking this oath, that yes, I may have things that are in my own personal best interests. Yes, I may have things that are in my party's best interests. Yes, people are bribing me and trying to give me money to do all of these things. But all things being equal, my responsibility, first and foremost, is to America. Full stop. And if you can't abide by the First Amendment, if you can't abide by these various laws that are in play, hey, maybe I shouldn't, as president, have a crypto coin while all of a sudden investing in crypto coins, where I'm going to get rich because my sons are going around getting money for their crypto coins. Same thing is true for Joe Biden, by the way, even though Donald Trump is that much more corrupt. Whereas Joe Biden was using his kid, knowing full well that his kid was leveraging his name and political interests in order to make money. I'm sitting here with my father, and if you don't give me $20 million, all of his political connections are going to be very angry at you going forward. Okay, well, why is Hunter Biden has no political connections in that sense? Joe Biden does. You can use Joe Biden's political connections to threat to somebody. You can't use Hunter's. I mean, he's a crackhead, right? Who Russians probably have all sorts of stuff on him. Not to mention, you can find pictures of him in a bathtub smoking crack. You can find pictures of him effectively doing porn, measuring M&Ms with his penis. That is not the guy that anyone has any respect for him, living a sleazy, degenerate lifestyle that he was effectively living. I'm not, and maybe I am criticizing. I don't care what lifestyle Hunter Biden lives. So even though I'm being brutal, I don't ultimately care. I'm being brutal to make the point that he is nothing that would allow him to threaten anybody with. His dad does. That is corrupt. It is refined corruption, a patina of okayness, but it's corrupt. Let's be very clear and straightforward about that. What Trump is doing takes that times 20. It is not even refined. It is just corrupt. There's a character in Three Body. Oh, I can't think of his name. He's Venezuelan president who they bring him on for, they try to push back against the Tricolores. And the guy made the point of saying, this is a strategy of a vulgar military guy. And at one point he says, apparently everything I do is vulgar. That's what Trump is. He's that guy. It's vulgar on its face. We are well past this moment where politicians gave a shit about American interests. Well past it. And I don't know how a government remains intact when that is the motif and the modus operandi, with a public that is fully anesthetized to the fact that the government doesn't give a shit. That is astonishing. They are putting $20 trillion on the debt while destroying social services, the bare minimum, the lowly version. So I will tell you this, I was in Albania, I had to get pain medication. I went to the pharmacy, I ended up buying 2 brands of pain meds, 2 packs of each. I paid $13. That's it. No insurance, no anything, just paying out of pocket, $13. How much would I have paid in America? Same pill, same medication, same drug. How much would I have paid in America? I hope you get my point. A government that gave a shit wouldn't have you paying that much for insurance. Government that gave a shit wouldn't have you paying that much in regards to just the basics of trying to live. A government that gave a shit wouldn't have you waiting 6 to 8 months for Social Security that doesn't pay for the things that you needed to pay for, or for that matter, will have a Medicaid that is dramatically insufficient to cover the things that you need Medicaid to pay for. It just wouldn't. It wouldn't have you paying, $30,000 a year, whatever the hell that is for school each year, year after year after year after year, or putting $50,000 of debt on the back of a 17-year-old when the 17-year-old has no concept of what $50,000 of debt even is. it wouldn't do it. That government is supposed to be looking out for your interests, not capital interests. And yeah, you can say there's a shared responsibility, fair enough, but it's supposed to be there for your interests against the hordes and the goblins, the demons of capitalistic self-interest that is looking to prey upon you as individuals. There's only one Leviathan that stands between you and the hordes of capitalists who are looking to take advantage, and that is supposed to be the government. That is not the way it works today. It hasn't worked like that in a long time. I'm saying a government that gave a shit wouldn't be that way. All right, I'm going to end this because at this point I'm bitching. It's pissed me off. I'm going to say we have one more. Aries for fries. Is that right? Aries for fries. Okay, yes, that is right. Anti-Semitism Award Act of 2025. Trump needs to sign it now. S558. Who put that out? Thomas Massey. He's the only one that seems to be legitimate on that issue. He's the only guy in Congress. All right, guys, I want to thank all of you for joining me. We had a good crowd. We had a damn good show. We ended on a strong note with Professor Richard Wolff. I'm going to say I'm going to say share. I'm a physical therapist and I hate gyms. That is too funny. Everybody who uses anti-Semitism to mean anti-Jewish bigotry is on Team Nazi. Everybody uses anti-Semitism to mean anti-Jewish bigotry is on Team Nazi. Anti-Semitism, honestly, at this point, is just a dog whistle that they use in order to hide the fact that they're murdering people and committing a genocide. It's amazing that Black folks can't use slavery every time you say something bad about a Black person, but they can hide behind that stupid shit. That victim stuff, I have no room for it. I don't give a shit. I care about what you're doing now. Now, what happened to you 80 years ago? Nobody gets to use that shit as an excuse. So, no, fuck that. You have a state, you get billions of dollars from the United States. They take people on these sad, pathetic tours to try to get them of mind into this mindset. They propagandize, and fact of the matter is brainwash the people who are in that country and grew up in those schools to behave in the fascistic way in which they behave right now and will probably need to be denazified when that government collapses, God willing. So it's no different than Hillary Clinton screaming sexism when Bernie Sanders gets into the race. Oh my God, Bernie Sanders is sexist for getting into the race. Hey, what about you being anti-Semitic for getting into the race? What do you mean? It's like, get the fuck out of here. All right, I'm going to say I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. You guys have a fantastic evening, and I will see you bright and early. That bill is to curb criticism of Israel. Oh, I see. That was the bill that they got rid of the first time around, if I'm not mistaken, because there was outrage over the fact that they would put a stupid fucking bill like that out in the first place. Yeah, that bill needs to be pulled. It should have never been put up. And again, this gets back to the whole anti-American stuff that this administration and this Congress is effectively doing. They are doing things that are actively against the interests of America for foreign sociopathic government that is at this point murdered over 100,000 people and is setting up concentration camps with our assistance, our help. And they're going to ethnically cleanse a population. Europe is no better. Don't believe this nonsense about Johnny come latelys 2 minutes ago saying, oh my God, it looks like you're starving people. You knew they were starving people for over a year. You guys have a fantastic day. Yeah. Have a fantastic evening. I'll see you guys. I might see you over the weekend. I'm going to see if Melania can join me because it doesn't seem like that Iran bill is going anywhere. And I'm curious on what Melania's take is going to be now that it's not going anywhere. Jamal should say pork pie high hat merchandise. This is a Federo. Thank you very much, Federo. If there are any Federo companies out there, hit me up. Have a good one all. Be safe. And I will see you guys Monday morning. We In fact, I think we're probably going to have a power show Monday morning. I'll see how it looks. You guys have a good one. Signing off.